Book 3, on Creation, Utpadikanda. This section deals with the origin and nature of the universe. According to Vasistha, this universe with its innumerable objects, its concepts of time and space, and its varied laws is only a creation of one's own mind. Just as the mind creates a world in the dream state, so it also creates an imaginary world in the waking state. The only difference between the dream and the waking state is that dreams are short and the waking state is relatively longer. Time and space are only ideas of mind. Through the mind's perception, many thousands of years may pass as a moment, or a moment in time in the waking state may be experienced as years in the dream state. The same is true of the concept of space. All these facts are illustrated by a number of interesting and revealing stories. Book 3, Chapter 1. The appearance of creation is from the mind of Brahma. It is through both worlds and light, i.e., the words of the Scripture and the lights of nature and reason, that the knower of the great God perceives the spirit of Brahma appearing within himself, like in a dream. He also knows him as such who understands him according to the holy text. What this is, that is the self. This passage shows, in short, the visible world at its creation residing in the empty bosom of Brahma. What this creation is, from where it arises, and how it becomes extinct in the end are not to be known in detail. O intelligent Rama, now hear me expound to you all things according to my best knowledge, and agreeably to their nature and substance in the order of creation. One conscious of himself as a spiritual and intelligent being views the passing world as a dream. This dream simile of the passing world applies equally to our knowledge of ego and non-ego. After the book describing the conduct of the seekers of liberation, Mamukshu Varahara follows the book of evolution, Utpadi, creation, which I am now going to propound to you. Bondage consists in our belief in the reality of the visible world, so our release depends on the negation of phenomena that are apparent to the senses. Now hear me tell you how to rid of the visible. Whoever is born in this world continues to progress until at last he obtains his final liberation, his ultimate perfection, or rises to heaven or falls into hell. Therefore I shall expound for you your understanding everything relative to the production and continuance of things, and their prior states as they were. Now hear me, Rama, give you your brief abstract of this book. Later I will expand upon it so you may know more of how creation is produced. Know that all that appears, either as living or inert in this world, are like appearances in a dream in the state of sound sleep, susupti, which becomes extinct at the end of an epoch, kalpa. Then there remains a nameless and undeveloped something in a state of deep, dark, and dank abyss, without any light or thick spread nebula over it. The wise give this great self-existence the titles of reality, Rita, self, Atma, supreme, Param, immense, Brahma, truth, Satyam, and so forth as common expressions to refer to the great spirit, Mahatman. Then this same spirit shows itself in another form called the individual soul, Jivatman, and comes afterwards to be understood in the limited sense of life. This inert living principle, Jiva, becomes its like the word suggests, the moving spirit, which afterwards with its power of thinking becomes the mind, and finally the embodied soul. Thus the mind is produced and changed from the quiescent nature of the great supreme spirit to a state of restlessness, like that of a surge heaving itself in the ocean. The mind soon evolves itself as a self-willing power that exercises its desire at all times and through which this extensive magic scene of the world is displayed for our view. This scene is figured as Virajamurti, or the manifestation of desire from the will of divine mind. In the Indian genealogy of gods, it is represented as the offspring of Brahma. As the word golden bracelet signifies nothing other than a bracelet made of gold, so the meaning of the word world is not different from its source, the divine will. Again, as the word gold bears the idea of the substance of which the bracelet is made, so the word Brahma conveys the meaning of the immensity which contains the world. But the word world contains no idea of Brahma, and neither does bracelet convey the idea of gold. The substance contains the form just as a stone does the statue, but the form does not contain the substance. The unreality of the world appears as a reality, just as the heat of the sun presents an unreal mirage in the moving sands of the desert as real waves of the sea. It is this fantasy which the learned in all things describe as ignorance, avidya, nature, sansriti, bondage, bandha, illusion, maya, error, moha, and darkness, tamas. Now hear me relate to you, O moon-faced Rama, about the nature of this bondage, whereby you will be able to know the mode and manner of our liberation from it. The intimate relation between spectator and spectacle is called his bondage because the spectator's mind is tightly bound to the object of his sight. Therefore, the absence of visible objects from the mirror of the mind is the only way to his liberation. Knowledge of the world, which is thinking that individual existence is different from others, is said to be a false view of the soul. There can be no liberation as long as one's labor under his blunder of the knowledge of separation. To say that the soul is not this and not that is an endless false dispute over words. Discrimination between alternatives only serves to increase the ardor for objects. Truth is not to be obtained by philosophers chopping logic or by pilgrimage or ceremonial acts any more than believing in the reality of the material world. It is hard to avoid the sight of the phenomenal world and to repress one's ardor for it, but it is certain that phenomena cannot lead us to reality, and that the real cannot mislead us to unreality. Wherever the invisible, inconceivable, and intelligent spirit exists, there the beholder views the visible beauty of God shining even in the midst of atoms. The phenomenal world has its rise from him, yet ignorant people who depart from him to the adoration of others resemble fools who forsake rice for gruel upon gruel. Although this visible world is apparent to sight, yet, O Rama, it is only a shadow of that being who resides alike in the smallest atom and in the mirror of the mind, who receives the image of the largest as well as the minutest things. The spirit is reflected in everything like a figure in the mirror, and it shines equally in rocks and seas and land and water as it does in the mirror of the mind. The visible world is the scene of constant sorrow, birth, decay, and death. By turns, the states of waking, dreaming, and sound sleep present the gross, subtle, and impermanent forms of things for our delusion. Here I sit in a meditative mood, having wiped the impressions of phenomena from my mind, but my meditation is disturbed by the recurrence of my memories of phenomena. This is the cause of the endless reincarnation of the soul. It is hard to maintain meditation beyond form, nirvikalpa samadhi, when the sight of the visible world is present before our physical and mental vision. Even the fourth state of Turiya, samadhi, without sense in the state of deep sleep, is soon succeeded by self-consciousness and external awareness. On rising from the state of deep meditation, one finds himself as if roused from sound sleep, and he again sees the world full of all its sorrows and imperfections opening wide before him. Then, O Rama, what is the good of this transient bliss which one attains by temporary meditation, when he again becomes subject to his sense of suffering of the world, like a veil of tears? But if one can attain a state of unalterable separation of his thoughts from all worldly objects, as he has in the state of deep sleep, then he is said to have reached the highest level of holiness on earth. Nobody has ever gained anything from reality with its scenes of unreal vanities, because whenever his thoughts come in contact with any outward thing, he finds reality inseparable from imperfect existence. Should anybody forcibly withdraw his attention from phenomena, and for a while fix his sight on a stone, afterwards he is sure to be carried away again by phenomena pressing upon his sight. It is well known to all that a yogi's practice of unflinching meditation, even if it has the firmness of a rock, cannot last owing to his worldly propensities. Even steady meditation that has attained the fixedness of a rock cannot advance one step towards the attainment of that tranquility which has no limit. Thus the sight of phenomena being altogether unavoidable, it is foolish to think that phenomena can be suppressed by practicing prayers and austerities and similar acts of tapas. The idea of the phenomena is as inherent in the mind of the spectator of the visible world as the seed of the lotus flower are contained in its inner cell. The ideal of the phenomenal world lies hidden in the minds of the spectators of the outer world, just like flavor and moisture are in a fruit, oil is in sesame seeds, and sweet scent is innate in flowers. Just like the fragrance of camphor and the smells of other substances are inherent in their nature, so the reflection of the visible world resides in the bosom of the intellect. As your dreams and desires rise and subside of themselves under the function of your intellect, so the idea of a thing always reoccurs to your mind from your original idea of that thing which has been impressed onto your mind, the seat of all that is visible. The mental appearance of the visible world deludes its beholder in the same way a fantasy appearance of a ghost or hobgoblin misleads a child. The notion of the visible world gradually expends itself like a seed that germinates in time, sprouts and spreads itself afterward in the form of a plant. As seeds and other minute life forms contained within the bosom of fruit and the embryos of animals expand themselves to become wonderful, beautiful forms, so does the seed of this world, lying hidden in the divine mind, unfold itself into the wonderful forms of visible phenomena in nature. Book 3, Chapter 2. Description of the first cause. Yama explains airborne Brahma to death, will without form or action. Vasistha resumed, Rama, now listen as I relate the story of Akasaja, the airborne Brahman, which will be precious to your ears and will enable you to better understand the drift of this book on creation. There lived a Brahman named Akasaja, who always sat reclined in his meditation, and was even inclined to do good to all creatures. Finding him long-lived, Death thought to himself, Only I am imperishable, and I devour all things one by one. How is it that I cannot stuff myself with this airborne? I find my teeth as blunt on him as the edge of a sword on solid rock. So thinking, he proceeded to the home of the Brahman, intent upon making an end of him. For who is not so dull in nature that he is not alert in his practice? But as Death was about to enter Akasaja's house, he was opposed by a fire as powerful as that in the final destruction of the last day of the world's dissolution. He passed through the flames and entered the house, where, seeing the holy man before him, he greedily stretched out his hand to grab him. Even with his 100 hands, Death was unable to grasp the holy man, just as it was impossible for the strongest to withstand a determined man in his habitual course. Death then went to his lord, Yama, the god of the underworld, to answer his question why he could not devour the airborne being. Yama explained, Death, do not overly trust your own strength that enables you to destroy the living. It is the act of the dying person that is the chief cause of his death, and nothing else. Therefore, be diligent and find out about the acts of the person you intend to kill, because it is only with their assistance that you will be able to seize your prey. Thereupon Death gladly wandered about in all the places under the horizon. He roved over inhabited lands as he did throughout empty and river lands. He traversed forests and jungles, marshy and rocky grounds, and maritime coast. He traveled to foreign lands and islands and pried through their wilderness, cities and towns. He searched through kingdom and countries, villages and deserts. He surveyed the entire earth to find out some act of the Brahman or any part of it. At last Death, despite all his search and efforts, came to find the act of airborne Brahman to be as nothing as the offspring of a barren woman, and Brahman's mind is fixed in meditation, as if it were a rock. Then Death returned from his reconnoitering and explorations to his all-knowing master Yama, and sought his advice, as servants do in matters of doubt and difficulty. Death answered Yama, saying, Tell me, my lord, where are the acts of the airborne Brahma to be found? After much thought, Yama replied as follows, Know, O Death, that this airborne seer has no act whatsoever, because he is born of empty air. Therefore his doings are as null and void. Whoever is born of air is as pure as air itself, and has no combination of cause or action, such as all embodied beings. He has no relationships with acts of his prior existence. He is as nothing as a child of a barren woman, like an unborn, uncreated, and unbegotten. Want of causes have made him a pure, empty being, and the lack of prior acts has made him as nothing as an ethereal tree. Deprived of former acts, his mind is not ruffled like those of others, nor is there any act in his present state whereby he may become a morsel to death. Such is the soul seated in the sheath of a void, and remaining forever as a simple form of its own causality, and not guided by any extraneous causation whatever. It has no prior deed, nor does it do anything at present, but continues as something like an intelligence with a form of air. Our inference that the soul causes the action of breathing and motion is a mere supposition, because the soul is devoid of every thought or tendency towards action. It sits meditating on itself as inseparable from the Supreme Intelligence, just as images are inseparable from the mind of the painter and the sculptor. The self-born Brahma is as intimately connected with the objects of his thought as fluidity is associated with water and the void with the sky. His soul is as immanent in the Supreme as motion is inherent in the wind. It is neither the accumulated act of past lives nor those of its present state. It is produced without the cooperation of accompanying causes and being free from prior motives. It is not subjected to the suffering that attend human life. It is found to be nothing other than its own cause, and having no other cause for itself, it is said to be self-produced. Say, how can you lay hold of a being who has done no act, and is not in the act of doing anything at present? It is only subject to you when it thinks itself mortal. You are easily able to take anyone who believes his soul to be of this earth and thinks himself to be an earthly being. Because this Brahma disowns the material body, he is a formless being. Therefore, it is as hard for you to enthrall him as it is to use a rope to tie the air. Death replied, saying, Tell me, my lord, how may the unborn Aja, or the self-born Swanabhu, be produced out of a vacuum, and how can an earthly or other elemental body both be and not be? Yama replied, This Brahman is neither born, nor is nothing at any time, but remains the same forever, like the light of intelligence of which there is no decay. Upon the end of creation there remains nothing except the tranquil, imperishable, and infinite Brahma himself in his spiritual form. This is the nature of the everlasting void, too subtle in its essence and devoid of all attributes, but viewing the present before its mind, the stupendous cosmos in the form of a huge mountain at the beginning of recreation. Being of the nature of consciousness, it is imperishable, but those who regard spirit to have any material body are liable to perish with it like all embodied beings. Thus in the beginning this Brahma remained in his state of unalterable, empty consciousness in the womb of emptiness. It is purely of the nature of empty understanding, and of the form of a vast expanse of omniscience. It is neither body nor organism, nor act or agency, nor desire of any kind in itself. That which is simply emptiness and pure light, unlike an embodied being, is never beset by the trap of new desires. It is nothing to know or see without itself. The only conception that we can have of it is that it resembles an extended intelligence. Under these circumstances, how is it susceptible to any earthly or other external form? Therefore, O Death, give up your attempts to lay hold on Brahman. Hearing these words from Yama, Death thought upon the impracticability of anyone laying hold of an empty void, and he sorrowfully returned to his own abode. Rama said, Sage, you said that Brahma is your great father. I think he meant to say that your father is the unborn, self-born, universal soul and consciousness. Vasistha speaking, What I had described to you, Rama, is Brahma, and the previous story about the discussion between Death and Yama also regards Brahma. Again, when Death, over the course of the Manvantara of the time, had made an end to all living beings, he thought himself strong enough to make an attempt to bear down upon the lotus-born Brahma also. It was then that he was rebuked by Yama, saying, It is your habit that makes you go on your accustomed course of killing. But the super-ethereal form of Brahma is beyond your reach because it simply has of the nature of the mind, connected only with its thoughts and having no concern with the actual form of things. Brahma is wonderfully empty consciousness, having the faculty of thought. Thus consciousness, being only emptiness, has neither any cause that created it, nor any effect created by it. As the insubstantial principle of will in men manifests itself without being connected with material form, so the self-born Brahma manifests to all in his own immaterial nature. Like strings of pearl appearing in a clear sky, and like the forms of cities seen in the dream, the self-born Brahma is manifest of himself without relation to external objects. As there is no beholder or anything beholden of the solitary Supreme Spirit, which is consciousness itself, so the mind manifests of itself. It is the mind's capacity to will that is called Brahma. Will, being a spiritual faculty, it has no connection with any material substance. As the mind of the painter is filled with images of various things, so the mind of Brahma is full of figures of all created being. The self-born Brahma is manifest in his own mind as Brahma is manifested in the empty sphere of his consciousness. He is without beginning, middle, or end. He is described as having a male figure when in reality, and like the offspring of a barren woman, he has no body at all. Book 3, Chapter 3. Subtle and gross bodies, formless mind. Brahma wills the appearance of form. Rama said, It is even so as you have said, that the mind is a pure essence and has no connection with the earth and other material substance. Mind is truly Brahma itself. Now tell me, O Holy One, why the memory of his former states does not cause his birth, as it is in the case of mine, yours, and all other being. Vasistha replied, Whoever had a former body accompanied with the acts of his prior existence necessarily retains its memories, which are the cause of his being reborn. But when Brahman is known to have no prior act, how is it possible for him to have memory of anything? Therefore he exists without any other cause except the causation of his own mind. It is by his own causality that the divine spirit is self-born, and is himself his own spirit. He is everlasting. His body is born of itself from the self-existent Brahman. This unborn or self-born Brahma has no material body whatever except his subtle spirit body, or astral body. Rama said, "The everlasting body is one thing and the mortal body is another. Now tell me, sage, whether all created beings have a subtle body like that of Brahma." Vasistha replied, "All created beings produced of a cause have two bodies, subtle and gross. But the unborn being, which is without a cause, has only one body. The uncreated Brahman is the cause of all created being, but the uncreated spirit, having no cause for itself, has only one body. The prime Lord of creation has no material body, but manifests himself in the empty form of his spiritual body. His body is composed of only mind, and he has no connection with the earth or any other material substance. He is the first Lord of creature who stretched creation from his empty body. All creation is only forms of images or ideas in his empty mind. They have no other pattern or originality in their nature. It is a truth well known to everyone that everything is of the same nature with its cause. Brahma is a non-existent being in the manner of perfect consciousness. He is purely a mind form. He is an intellectual entity, not material. He is the prime cause of all material and productions in the physical world, and he is born of himself with his prime mobile force in the form of the mind. It was by the first impulse given by the prime moving power that this expanse of creation came to be spread in the same ratio as the currents of air and water are in proportion to the impetus given to them. This creation, shining so bright to our sight, derives its light from the luminous mind of the formless Brahma, and it appears real to our conception. What we experience in dreams is the best illustration. Like the enjoyment of sexual bliss in a dream an unreal object of desire presents itself as an actual gain to our fond and false imagination. The empty, immaterial, and formless spirit is described as the self-born and corporeal lord of creatures in the form of the first male. He remains imperceptible in his state of pure consciousness, but becomes manifest to all by the evolution of his will. He cannot be discerned in his absolute state of an action, but becomes conspicuous to us in the display of his nature in creation. Brahma is a divine power of will. He is personified as the first male agent of creation, but he is devoid of any physical body. He is only the spiritual form of the mind, and he is the sole cause of the existence of the three worlds. It is Brahma's will that makes the self-born exert his energies, just as human desires impel all mankind to action, and as the empty mind manifests itself as a mountain of desires. Then it forgets its everlasting and incorporeal nature and assumes to itself a solid material body, and shows itself in the shape of a deceptive apparition. But Brahma, who is of an unsullied understanding, is not involved in forgetting himself. That occurs through the transformation of his unknowable nature to the known state of will. Being unborn of material substance, he sees no appearance like others who are exposed by their ignorance to the misleading error of falsehood that appear before them like a mirage. As Brahma is merely of the form of the mind and not composed of any material substance, so the world, being the product of the eternal mind, is of the same nature as its original source. Again, as the uncreated Brahma has no cause for himself, so his creation has no cause other than himself. Therefore, there is no difference between product and its producer, and it is certain that the work must be as perfect as its author. There is nothing like cause and effect to be found in this creation, because the three worlds are only prototypes of the archetype of the divine mind. The world is stretched out in the model of the divine mind. It is not formed by any other Holy Spirit. Creation is as immanent in the mind of God as fluidity is inherent in water. The mind spreads out this extended unreality of the world like castles in the air and builds paradise cities. There is no such thing as materiality, which is as false as a conception as mistaking a rope for a snake. Hence it is impossible for Brahma and other beings to exist as individual bodies. Even spiritual bodies are non-existent to enlightened understanding. As for the material body, it has no room in existence. Man, Manu, who derives his name from his mind, Manas, is the form of the will soul called Vernichi, the creator a name of Brahma. His dominion is the mental or intellectual world, Mano Rajyam, where all things appear in the form of realities. The mind is the creative Brahma through the exercise of its inherent will, sankalpa, intent, volition, for beginning or creation. It displays itself in the form of the visible universe by development of its own essence. This creator or creative power is of the form of the mind, just like the mind itself is of the form of the creator. Neither has any connection with any material substance, which is a mere creation of the imagination. All visible things are contained in the bosom of the mind, just as the lotus blossom resides in the seed of the lotus. Hence there is no difference between the mental and visible appearance of things, nor has anyone anywhere ever doubted this. Whatever you see in a dream, whatever desires you have at heart, and all the ideals of your fancy together with your ideas, notions, and impressions of phenomena, know that it is your mind that is the receptacle for them all. But the mind can choose to hold phenomena as desirable, making them harmful to the beholder as an apparition is to a child. The ideal of phenomena develops itself as the germ contained in the seed, and in its proper time and place it becomes a large tree. If there is no rest with what is real, then there can be no peace with phenomena that are full of troublesome and give no solace to the mind. It is impossible for the feeling of the perception of phenomena to ever be lost to their perceiver, yet only its subsistence is said to constitute liberation. Book 3, Chapter 4, Nightfall, Creation of Objects. Valmiki describes, while Vasistha, the leading sage, was speaking without interruption, the entire assembly was intent upon listening to him with a fixed tone and tenor of their mind. The string of bells that warriors tie to their waists ceased to jingle. Everyone was motionless. Even the parrots in their cages ceased to warble or flutter. The ladies forgot their dalliances and remained quietly attentive to their lecture. Everyone in the royal hall was fixed in attention, as if they were painting in statues. Only an hour remained before the closing of the day, and the sunbeams became agreeable to all. The busy bustle of the world was dwindling away with the glimmering light of the setting sun. The beds of full-blown lotuses exhaled their fragrance all around, and soft breezes were playing about, as if to attend the audience. The sun glided away from his daily course and advanced to the top of the solitary mountain where it sat, as if he meant to reflect on all that he had heard. The shades of night began to cover the landscape. Frost began to spread over forest lands, as if they were cooled by the cooling lectures on philosophy. Now people failed to gather in all directions, as if they had availed themselves of the sage's instructions to abate the fervor of their exertion. All objects on earth cast their lengthened shadows, as if they were stretching their necks to hear Vasistha preaching. Then the chamberlain humbly advanced to the monarch of the earth and begged to inform him that the time for the rituals of evening washing and service was about to expire. Upon this, sage Vasistha stopped his sweet speech and said, "Let what has been said, mighty king, be all for this day. I will resume my lecture and speak of the other things tomorrow." The sage held his silence, and the king responded, "Be it so as you will," and rose from its seat. For his own good he honored the godly sage and the other seers and Brahmins with due respect and offerings of flowers, water, worthy honorary gifts, rewards, fees, gifts, and homage. Then rose the entire assembly with the kings and the sages. The gems and the jewels that decked princes and people shed their light on the faces of all. There was a commingling, tinkling of bracelets and armlets as the throng mingled in their exit, mixed with the flashes of the necklaces and brocades that decorated their body. The jewels attached to the tuft and crest of the hair on top of their heads emitted a jingling sound resembling the humming of bees amidst their flowery braids. The face of the sky, shining on all sides with a purple color, reflected by the golden ornaments of their persons, seemed as if it was pleased with the wise saying and sense of the sage. Celestial visitors vanished into the air, and earthly guests retired to their homes on earth, where they performed their evening rituals. In the meantime, Black Night made her appearance on earth, and like a bashful young maiden, withdrew to the closet separate from the rest of mankind. The Lord of the Day passed to shine on other lands, for truly it was the avowed duty of every good person to give the benefit of equal light to all. The shade of evening veiled all sides and uplifted the canopy of starry sphere on high, which like the spring atmosphere was emblazoned with star-like kinsuka flowers. The birds of the air took to their rest in the hollows of mango trees or on the tops of kadamba trees. Like honest people of fair dealing, find their rest in the purity of their minds and the contriteness of their inner hearts. The skirts of the clouds, tinged with the red by the slanting beams of the setting sun, and with a shade of yellow color upon them, decorated the western hills with vests of yellow garb, while the sky crowned their heads with glimmering wreaths of starry groups. The goddess of the evening, having departed after receiving her homage evening prayers, was followed by her train of dark nightshades, appearing as black-bodied fiends, vitalas. A gentle and cooling breeze was blowing, softened by dewdrops of night, and opening the petals of Kamuta lotus flowers, bearing their fragrance all around. A thick gloom covered the face of nature, and the stars were hidden under the mist of light. All the quarters of the sky, with their overhanging loose and hairy mists, seemed like the face of widow shrouded by the dark, disheveled hair of mourning. Now appeared the moist orb of the moon, in her ambrosial form in the milky ocean of the sky, to moisten the mundane heat with her milk-white beams. On her rising, the thick mist of darkness fled from the eastern hemisphere, and became invisible in the air, just like the darkness of ignorance is put to flight from the minds of monarchs when they attend to wise sayings. Then the sages and seers, the rulers and the priests of the people, took their rest in their respective beds, as the words of Vasistha, full of meaning, rested in the recesses of their hearts. As the thick darkness of night, resembling the dark complexion of death, receded from the arena of the sky, the dewy dawn of day, with their slow-moving pace, followed close on its footstep. Twinkling stars disappeared from the sky, just like flowers on trees are blown away by wind and strewn on the ground like the fallen stars of heaven. The sun became visible to the eyes, his rays roused them from the sleep, just as the newly rising faculty of reason becomes conspicuous in the minds of enlightened great souls. Fragments of clouds shining with sunlight spread a yellow covering over the eastern hills, which were still decorated with strings of stars, pennant on the crest of their lofty heads. After the performance of their morning services, all the terrestrial and celestial congress assembled again at the royal hall, in the order and manner of the day before. The full assembly took their seats and sat without moving, like a lake covered with lotus remains calm after a storm. Then Rama addressed Vasistha, the most eloquent of sages, with honey-like words about the subject under investigation. He said, "Tell me plainly, O venerable sir, about the form of the mind which developed itself in all things of the universe as they were its offshoots." Vasistha replied, "Rama, the mind has no form that anyone can see. Other than its name, it has nothing substantial, only the formless and irremovable void. The mind as an entity, Sat, is not situated in any part of the outer body, nor is it within any cavity of the heart or brain, but know it, O Rama, to be situated everywhere as the all-encompassing void. This world is produced from it, and it is like the waters of the mirage. It manifests itself in the form of its fleeting thoughts, which are as false as the appearance of secondary moons in the mist. The thinking principle is generally believed to be something between the positive and negative, or real and unreal. You must know it as such and no other. That which represents of all objects is called the mind. There is nothing else to which the term mind is applicable. Know that will or volition is the same as the mind, and that the mind is no different from the will, just as fluidity is the same with water, as there is no difference between air and its motion and wind. For wherever there is any will, there is also that attribute of the mind. Nobody has ever taken will and mind to be different things. The representation of any object, whether real or unreal, is mind, and that is to be known as Brahma, the great Father of all. The incorporeal soul in the body is called the mind, and it has in itself the knowledge of all senses and everlasting ideas of the physical world. That is, the sentient and thinking soul is the same as the mind. The learned have given different names like ignorance, intellect, mind, bondage, sin, and darkness to the visible appearance of creation. The mind has no form other than a receptacle and reflector of ideas about the visible world, which, I repeat, is no new creation, but a reflection of the mind. The visible world is situated in an atom of the great mind, just like the germ of a lotus plant is contained within its seed. The visible world is as innate in the all-knowing mind of light is inherent in the sunbeams, and velocity and fluidity are innate in wind and liquid. But the visionary ideas of phenomena are as false and fleeting in the minds of their observers as the forms of a jewel in gold and water in a mirage, and they are as wrong as the foundation of a castle in the air or seeing a city in a dream. Because phenomena appears to be real to their observer, O Rama, I will cleanse them from your mind like dirt from a mirror. Just like the disappearance of an appearance makes the observer no longer an observer, know that this is what happens when the mind is in a state of separation or detachment from whatever is real or unreal in the world. Having arrived at this state, all the passions of the soul and the desires of the mind will be at rest, like torrents of rivers at the calm that follows the stillness of the wind. It is impossible that things having the form of space, earth, and air will appear the same in the clear light of reason as they do to our ordinary sight. Thus, when the observer comes to know the unreality of the phenomena of the three worlds, as well as his own entity, then his pure soul attains knowledge of the solitude of divine existence, Kavalya. Such a mind reflects the image of God in itself as in a mirror, while all others are like blocks of stone incapable of receiving any reflection at all. After suppression of the sense of I and you and the air of the reality of the outer world, the observer becomes withdrawn and remains in his sitting posture without seeing external things. Rama replied, "If I cannot suppress my perception of entity, or an entity is unable to become a non-entity, or if I am unable to see phenomena as non-existent, then tell me, O Holy One, how can I to uproot the disease of our eagerness for phenomena from the mind, a disease which bewilders understanding and afflicts us with a series of troubles?" Vasistha replied, "Now hear my advice, Rama, for the suppression of this illusion of phenomena, whereby it will surely die away and become utterly extinct. Know, Rama, that nothing that is can ever be destroyed or become extinct. Though you remove it, yet it will leave its seed or trace in the mind. This seed is the memory of such things which reopens the ideas of the phenomena in the mind, expanding themselves in the fallacious notions of the forms of big worlds, skies, mountains, and oceans. These fallacious notions, called faults and defects of understanding, are obstacles in the way to liberation, but they do not affect the sages who are liberated. Again, if the world and all other phenomena have real existence, they cannot confer liberation on anyone because phenomena, whether they be situated within or without us, are themselves perishable. Learn, therefore, this solemn truth, which will be fully explained to you in the subsequent parts of this work, that all things appearing in the forms of emptiness, elementary forms, the world, and I and you are non-entities. They have no meaning. Whatever is seen as apparent is nothing other than the undecaying and imperishable essence of the Supreme Brahma himself. The abundance of creation is an expansion of his fullness, and the quiet of the universe rests in his quietude. It is his quality of sky that is the substance of emptiness, and it is his immensity that underlies the immense cosmos. Nothing visible is real, and there is neither spectator nor spectacle here. There is nothing like emptiness or solidity in nature. All this is only a piece of extended intelligence. Rama replied, "The proverbs about the son of a barren woman grinding stones, the horns of a rabbit, the dancing of a hill with its arms extended, oil flowing from sand, marble dolls reading books, clouds in a painting roaring, and other similar adages apply to your words on the reality of an unreal essence of God. I see this world to be full of disease, death, troubled mountains, emptiness, and other things. How is it, sage, that you tell me that they do not exist? So that I may be certain of this truth, tell me, sage, why you describe this world as unsubstantial, unproduced, and non-existent." Vasistha replied, "Know, Rama, that I do not speak contradictions. Hear me explain how unreality appears as real, like the proverb of the son of a barren woman. All this was unproduced before and did not exist in the beginning of creation. It comes to appearance from the mind like a city in a dream. The mind also was not produced in the beginning of creation, and was an unreality itself. Therefore, hear me tell you how we come to a notion of it. This unreal mind by itself spreads the false and changing scenes of the visible world, just as in a dream we see ever-changing unrealities as true. Then the mind exerts its will in the fabrication of the body, and spreads the magic scene of the phenomenal world far and wide. The mind, by the potential of its fluctuations, has many actions of its own, such as expansion, jumping, motion, craving, wandering, diving and seizing, and many other voluntary efforts. Book 3, Chapter 5, On the Original Cause, Mula Karana. Rama said, "O chief of the sages, what is the cause that leads to our misconception of the mind? How is it produced, and what is the source of its illusion? Tell me, sage, in brief about the first production of the mind, and then, O best of the eloquent, you may say what else there is to be said on the subject." Vasistha replied, "Incident to the universal dissolution, when all things are reduced to nothing, this infinity of visible objects remains in a state of calm and quiet before their creation. There is only great God in existence, who is uncreated and without decay, who is the creator of all at all times, who is all in all and supreme soul of all, and who resembles the sun that never sets. He whom language fails to describe, and is known by only the liberated, who is termed the soul only by fiction, and not by his real nature, which is unknowable. He is the cosmic mind, Purusha, of the Samkhya philosophers, the Brahman of Vedanta followers, the intelligence of the Gnostics, wholly pure and apart from all. He is known as vacuum by vacuists, and the one who gives the sun its light. He is truth itself, the power of speech and thought and vision, and all action and passion forever. He is who, though ever existent everywhere, appears as non-existent to the world, and though situated in all bodies, seems to be far from them. He is the enlightener of our understanding, like the light of the sun to the world. It is he from whom the gods Vishnu and others are produced, like solar rays from the sun, and from whom infinite worlds have come into existence like bubbles on the sea. It is he to whom these multitudes of visible creations return, like the water of the earth to the sea, and who enlightens all souls and bodies like a lamp. He is present alike in heaven and earth, and in the netherworlds, who abides equally in all bodies, whether of the mineral, vegetable, or animal. He resides alike in each particle of dust as in the high and huge mountain range, and he rides as swiftly on the wings of wind as he sleeps in the depth of the earth. He appoints the 8 internal and external organs of sense and action to their several functions, and he has made dull and dumb creatures as inert as stone, and as mute if they were sitting in meditation. He has filled the skies with emptiness and the rocks with solidity. He has dissolved waters to fluidity, and has concentrated all light and heat in the sun. He has spread these wonderful scenes of the world like clouds sprinkle charming showers of rain, both as endless and constant as they are charming and sweet to sight. It is he who causes the appearance and disappearance of worlds in the sphere of his infinity, like waves in the ocean, and in whom these phenomena rise and set like the running sands of the desert. His spirit is the indestructible soul that resides as a germ of decay and destruction inside animals. It is so minute as to lie hidden within the body, and so huge as to fill all existence. His nature, Prakriti, spreads herself like a magic vine throughout the space of emptiness and produces the fair fruit in the form of the cosmic egg, while the outward organs of bodies, resembling the branches of this plant, keep dancing about the stem, the intelligent soul, shaken by the breeze of life which is ever fleeting. It is he who shines the gem of intelligence in the heart of the human body, and it is he from whom the luminous orbs constituting the universe continually derive their luster. It is that colossal of intelligence which, like a cloud, sheds ambrosial draughts of delight to soothe the souls and showers forth innumerable beings everywhere like raindrops. It bursts into constant flashes showing the prospects of repeated creation, which are as momentary as flashes of lightning. It is his wonderful light that displays the world to our wondering sight, and it is from his being that both real and unreal derive their reality and unreality. The unconscious and ungodly soul turns to the attraction of others against its own purpose, while the tranquil soul rests in itself. It is he who transcends all existence, and by whom all existent beings are bound, in their proper times and place, to their destined actions, as they are also bound to their free actions, motion, and efforts of all kind. It is he, from his personality of pure consciousness, Sit, cosmic consciousness, became of the form of emptiness, then by means of his empty mind and empty thoughts filled it with substance, wherein his soul was to reside, and whereon his spirit had to preside. Having thus made the infinite host of worlds in the immense sphere of the universe, he is yet neither the agent of any action, nor the author of any act in it, but remains ever the same as the soul of one alone, in his unchangeable and unimpaired state of self-consciousness, and without any fluctuation, evolution, or adhesion of himself, as he is quite unconcerned with the world. Book 3, Chapter 6, Honest Effort Required to Attain Self-Knowledge. Vasistha said, "It is by the knowledge of this transcendent, supreme Spirit and God of gods that one may become an adept, and not by the rigor of religious austerities and practices. Here nothing else is needed than the culture and practice of divine knowledge, and thereby the truth being known, one views the errors of the world like the satisfied traveler looks at a mirage in a clear light. God is not far from or too near us. He is not obtainable by what he is not, such as adoration of images or ritual acts. He is the image of light and joy, and is perceivable on ourselves. Here austerities and charities, religious vows and observances are of no good whatever. It is only the calm peacefulness of one's own nature that is a value effort of a person to serve God. The best means to attain divine knowledge are fondness for the society of the righteous and devotion to the study of good books. Ritual services and practices serve only to strengthen the trap of our inborn delusion, which only true knowledge can sever. As soon as one knows one's own inner light to be God, one gets rid of his miseries and becomes liberated in his living state. Rama said, having known the self in himself, one is no more exposed to the evils of life or even of death itself. But say, how is this great God of gods to be attained from such great distance as we are placed from him, and what rigorous austerities and amount of pains are necessary for it? Vasistha replied, he is to be known through your courageous efforts in knowledge and faith, and by the aid of clear understanding and right reasoning, and never by the practice of austerities or ablutions, or by acts attended with bodily pain of any kind. For know, O Rama, that all your austerities and charities, your painstaking and mortifications are of no efficacy unless you wholly renounce your passion and enmity, your anger, pride and selfishness, and your envy and jealousy. For whoever with a heart full of vile passion is liberal with money he has earned by defrauding others, the merit of such liberality accrues to the rightful owner of the property and not to its professed donor. Whoever observes any vow or rite with a mind moved by passion, he passes for a hypocrite and reaps no benefit for his act. Therefore, for putting down the disease and disturbances of the world, try your manly exertions in securing the best remedies of good precepts and good company. No other course of action except to exert one's courage is conducive to allaying all the miseries and troubles of all life. Now learn what this courage is, so that you may attain wisdom and annihilate the maladies of passion, affection, and animosity in your nature. True courage consists in remaining in an honest calling that conforms with the law and good custom of your country, and in a contented mind that shrinks from savoring the enjoyment of life. It consists in the exertion of one's energy to the utmost of his power, without bearing any murmur or grief in his soul, and in one's devotion to the society of the good and perusal of good works in Scripture. He is truly brave who is quite content with what he gets, and spurns at what is unlawful for him to take, who is attached to good company and eager to study faultless works. They who are of great mind and who have known their own nature, and those of all others by their right reasoning, are honored by the gods Brahma, Vishnu, Indra, and Shiva. One should diligently turn towards he who is called righteous by a majority of good people as the best and most upright of men. The best scriptures are considered to be those which deal primarily with spiritual knowledge. One who constantly meditates on them is surely liberated. It is by means of right discrimination derived from keeping good company and studying holy works that our understanding is cleared of its ignorance, just like dirty water is purified by kata seeds, and as the minds of men are purified by the philosophy of yoga. Book 3, Chapter 7. God is pure consciousness. The phenomenal world is non-existent. Rama said, tell me, O Holy One, about this God that you have spoken of, whose knowledge you said leads to our liberation. Where is he situated, and how can I know him? Vasistha replied, this God of whom I spoke is not of any distance from us. He is situated within these our bodies, and he is known to us as the form of pure consciousness. He is all in all, but all this world is not the omnipresent himself. He is one alone, but is not all that is visible. It is this consciousness that is in Shiva, who wears the crescent moon on his head. It is the same in Vishnu, who rides on his Garuda eagle, and in Brahma, who is born of the lotus. The sun also is a particle of intelligence. Rama said, so it is, and even children say that if the whole world is mere consciousness, then why call it by any other name? What is the use of teaching anyone about it when everyone is full of intelligence? Vasistha replied, if you believe pure consciousness is the same as the intelligent world, then you know nothing about how to get rid of this world. The world is truly intelligent, O Rama, but the animal soul is called a brutish, pashu animal, observer of things because it looks only after sensual gratifications, which give rise to only fears of disease, decay, and death. The animal soul, jiva, though an incorporeal substance, is an ignorant thing and subject to pain and sorrow. The mind, manas, also, though capable of intelligence, has become the root of all evil. Intellectual liberation from thoughts of the world is one state. Unintelligent gazing at it is another. He who knows the better of these two states of the soul has no cause of sorrow. He who has seen the all-surpassing Supreme Being has all of his heartstrings cut asunder and all the question of his mind driven away. The effects of his acts are washed away. The longing after phenomena does not cease unless the perception of phenomena is effaced from the mind. How then is this perception to be effaced? How is it possible to have a longing after the unintelligible intelligence without suppressing our longing for phenomena? It is only possible by avoiding the external perception of the mind. Rama said, "Sage, tell me about the empty animal soul, and how the knowledge of such soul does not enable one to get rid of his reincarnation. Tell me also, who is that man who by company with the good and study of good works has crossed the ocean of the world and beholds the Supreme Soul in himself?" Vasistha replied, "Whatever animal souls, having been cast into the wilderness of this life, long after his intelligent soul, they are truly wise and know him in themselves. Whoever believes the animal soul to be the life of the world and thinks consciousness requires pain, he can never know him anywhere. If the Supreme Soul is known to us, O Rama, the succession of our sorrow is ended, like the fatal cholera after extraction of its poison." Rama said, "Tell me, O Holy One, about the true form of the Supreme Soul, by light of which the mind may escape from all its errors." Vasistha replied, "The Supreme Soul is seen in ourselves and within our bodies in the same way as we are conscious that our minds are still be within us after its flight to distant countries. Our notion of the Supreme Spirit is often lost in the depth of our mind in the same way as the existence of the outer world becomes extinct in our consciousness during yoga meditation. We lose our sense of seeing and the seen in the knowledge of Him who is a non-empty vacuum or a substantive emptiness. He whose substance appears as a vacuum, and whom exists the empty fullness of the universe, and who appears as emptiness itself, in spite of the multitude of his creation existing in him, is truly the form of the Supreme Soul. The form of the Supreme Soul that you want to know is he who, though full of intelligence, appears to stand before us like an unconscious huge rock, and who, though quite subtle in his nature, seems to be some gross body to our conception. That which encompasses the inside and outside of everything, and assumes the name and nature of everything to itself, is truly the form of the Supreme. As light is connected with sunshine, and emptiness with the sky, and as omnipresence is present with everything and everywhere, such is the form of the Supreme Spirit that you want to know." Rama asked, "But how are we to understand that he who bears the name and nature of absolute and infinite reality should yet be compressed within anything visible in the world? Such is quite impossible to believe." Vasistha replied, "The false conception of the creation of the world resembles the false impression of colors in a clear sky. It is wrong, O Rama, to take something as real which does not exist in nature. It is the knowledge of Brahman that constitutes his form, or else there is no act of his whereby he may be known to us. He is entirely devoid of any visible form, and therefore there is no better way for anyone other than to know him as truth. After all traces of phenomena is gone, there remains a preeminent object of conception, which is inborn and manifest of itself. This concept of the supereminent, having no visible appearance, often has no reflection, and at other times it is reflected in the mirror of the mind. Nobody has ever conceived this transcendent truth in himself, who has not at the same time been convinced of the impossibility of the existence of the visible world." Rama replied, "Tell me, O sage, how the existence of so many extensive worlds composing the visible universe can be thought of as unreal or comprised in the minutiae of the divine mind, like Mount Meru in the sesame seed." Vasistha replied, "If you stay in the company of holy men a few days, and if you study sacred scriptures with a steady mind with me, then I will purge this false view of phenomena from your understanding, like a delusive mirage from one sight. This absence of the view will extinguish your sense of being the viewer and restore you to your intelligence alone. When the viewer is united with the view, and the view with the viewer, then duality becomes unity. Duality blends into an inseparable unity. Without union of the two, there is no success of either. When viewer and the view have disappeared, only one unity remains. I will cleanse the impurity of all your sense of I and you, the world and all other things, from the mirror of your mind, by bringing you to your consciousness of self, and the total negation of everything else. From nothing never comes a something, and from something never proceeds a nothing. So there is no difficulty whatever in removing what does not exist in nature. In the beginning this world which appears so very vast and extensive was not in being. It resided in the pure spirit of Brahma. It has evolved from the mind of Brahma. The thing called the world was never produced. It is not in being, and it does not actually appear. It is like gold in the form of a bracelet. It is not difficult to alter and reduce it to its gross metallic state. I will explain it fully by their examples whereby this truth may appear of itself and impress itself irresistibly in your mind. How can something be said to exist that was never brought into existence? How can there be water in a mirage, or a ring of an eclipse in the moon? As a barren woman has no sun, and a mirage has no water, and as the sky has no plant growing in it, so there is no such thing as what we falsely call the world. Whatever you see, O Rama, is the indestructible Brahma himself. I have shown you this many times with good reasoning, and not just with mere words. It is unreasonable, O intelligent Rama, to disregard something a learned man tells you with good reasoning. The dull-headed fellow who neglects to listen to the words of reason and wisdom is deemed as a fool, and is subject to all sorts of difficulties. Book 3, Chapter 8. Nature of Good Scriptures, Yoga Vasistha as the treasury of all. Rama asked, how can it be reasonably shown and established that there is nothing to be known and seen in this world, although we have obvious notions of it supported by sense and right reasoning? Vasistha answered, this endemic of fallacious knowledge of the reality of the world has been prevalent for a long time. It is only by true knowledge that this wrong application of the word world can be removed from the mind. I will tell you a story, Rama, for your success in this knowledge. If you will pay attention to it, you will become both intelligent and liberated. But if the impatience of a brutish creature makes you get up and leave after hearing only half the story, then you shall reap no benefit from it. Whoever seeks some object and strives for it, he of course succeeds in getting it, but if he becomes tired of it, he fails. Rama, if you keep to the company of the good and to the study of good scripture, then surely you will arrive at your state of perfection in the course of a few days or months, according to the degree of your diligence. Rama said, O you who are best acquainted with the scriptures, tell me which is the best scripture for the attainment of spiritual knowledge, such that its familiarity may release us from the sorrow of this life. Vasistha replied, Know, O high-minded Rama, that this work is the best of all others on spiritual knowledge. It is the auspicious Yoga Vasistha, great Ramayana, the scripture of scriptures. This Ramayana is the best of histories, and it serves to enlighten understanding. It is known to contain the essence of all history. But by hearing these doctrines, one easily finds his liberation coming of itself to him. This is why it is regarded as the most holy writing. All the existing scenes of the world will vanish upon their mature consideration, just like thoughts in a dream are dispersed after waking and realizing one had been dreaming. Whatever there is in this work can also be found in others, but what is not found here cannot be found elsewhere. Therefore, the learned call this the treasury of philosophy. Whoever attends to these lectures every day shall have his excellent understanding undoubtedly stored day by day with transcendent knowledge of divinity. He who finds this scripture to be disagreeable to his polluted taste may prefer to browse some other scripture that is more wordy and eloquent. One feels himself liberated in his life by listening to these lectures, just as one finds himself healed of a disease by the potion of some effective medicine. The attentive hearer of these lessons perceives their efficacy in himself in the same way as one feels the effects of curses or blessings that always have their full effect in time. All worldly miseries are at an end when he who considers well these spiritual lectures within himself. A similar effect is hard to be produced through charity or austerities, or through performing rituals ordained in the ancient Vedic text, or through the many hundreds of practices that Scriptures describe. Book 3, Chapter 9. Description of living and bodiless liberation, God as a supreme cause of all, Parama Karana. Vasistha continued, They are truly delighted and gratified with all their hearts and minds, are always devoted to holy conversation among themselves. Those devoted to the acquisition of knowledge and investigation of spiritual science enjoy the same bliss of liberation in their living state as it is said to attend disembodied souls. Rama said, Tell me, O Holy One, the difference between liberation with and without a body, that I may try to learn with an understanding enlightened by the light of Scripture. Vasistha said, Whoever remains as he is and continues intact as emptiness amidst society is called the liberated, while in the body, Jivan Mukta. Who remains employed only in his exercise of intellect and seems so to be sleeping in his waking state, though he is conducting his worldly affairs, is called liberated while in the body. One whose countenance is neither flushed nor dejected in pleasure or pain, and who remains content with what he gets, is called liberated while living. One whose waking is like the state of sound sleep, who is not awake to the accidents of the waking state, and whose waking state does not sense the desires incident to it, is called liberated in this life. Who, though moved by feelings of affection, enmity, fear, and the like, is at rest, as clear and undisturbed as emptiness within himself, is called liberated while he is alive. Who has not an air of pride in him, and is not conceited when he does or refrains to do anything, is called self-liberated in his lifetime. Who with one glance or wink of his eye has a full view of the whole of creation and the final destruction of the world, like the Supreme Self, is said to be liberated in his lifetime. Whoever is neither feared nor is afraid, and who is free from the emotion of joy, anger, and fear, such a person is liberated in life. Who is quiet and quietly disposes his business of his world, and who, though he stands as an individual in the sight of men, but attaches no individuality to himself, and though who is a sentient being is unconscious to all impressions, such a person is the living, liberated soul. Who, being full of all possessions and having everything present before him, remains cold and apathetic to them, as if they were useless to him, such a man is liberated in his life. Now, leaving the subject of liberated while in the body, I will describe what they call liberation without body, vidhamukta, which enters the soul like a breath of wind after it has fled from the mortal body. The disembodied free spirit neither rises nor sets, nor is it subject to wane. It is neither manifest nor hidden. It is not at a distance, nor is it in me, you, or any other person. It shines forth in the form of the sun and preserves the world like Vishnu. It creates the world in the shape of the lotus-born Brahma, and destroys all as Rudra or Shiva. It takes the form of the sky supported on the shoulders of the air that supports all living beings, gods, sages, and demigods in the three worlds. It takes the form of boundary mountains that separates earth from sky. It becomes the earth and supports these numerous types of beings. It takes the form of trees, plants, and grass, and yields fruits and grains for nourishment. It takes the forms of fire and water and burns and melts in them by itself. It sheds ambrosia in the form of the moon, and causes death in the shape of poison. It becomes light with which it fills the sky, and it spreads darkness in the form of dullness, tamas. It becomes vacuum to empty space for all, while the form of the hills it obstructs their free passage on earth. In the form of the fleet mind it moves the self-moving animals, and in the form of dull matter it fixes that which is incapable of motion. It girds the earth by its form of the ocean, just like the bracelet encircles the arm. The bodiless spirit takes upon it the great body of the sun, and illuminates all the worlds with their minute particles while it remains quiet in itself. Whatever is shining in this universe, or ever was or is to be, in any of the three, past, present, and future times, know them all, O Rama, as forms of the divine spirit. Rama said, "Tell me, O Holy One, why this view of liberation appears so very difficult to me. It makes me believe that liberation is altogether incomprehensible and unattainable by anyone." Vasistha replied, "This liberation is called nirvana, and it is also called Brahman. Attend now to the means of its attainment. All such visible objects known as I, you, this, and the like, because they are unproduced from the eternal being, Sat, of God, it is impossible to have any conception of them in our minds." Rama said, "I think, O best of them who knows the knowable, that the bodiless soul of the liberated, when they pass through the bounds of the three worlds, have to be born again according to the course of nature." Vasistha replied, "Those who retain a memory of the three worlds have to move about in them, but those who have lost the idea of their existence are absorbed in infinity. For how can one derive knowledge of the unity of God from his belief in duality, the separate existence of the world? Therefore, the figurative sense of the cosmos as God or Vishwa cannot give the spiritual and infinite idea of Brahma. He is no other but himself, of the nature of pure intellect, and of the form of the clear and tranquil emptiness. Brahma is said to be the world in order to signify his manifestation of its unreality as a reality to us. I have well considered a golden bracelet and found nothing as a bracelet in it except its gold. I observed the billows and found nothing in them but water. Where there was no water, I saw no wave to rise. I saw no vibration except anywhere in the wind, which is the only force in motion moving all things in the world. As emptiness abides in air and water appears in the burning deserts, as there is light spreading over all creation, so the spirit of Brahma manifests in the three worlds in the forms of the very worlds themselves. Rama said, "Tell me, O sage, what makes this world, with its nature of absolute non-existence, exhibit such distinct appearance in its phenomena? Tell me also, if the viewer and the view both become extinct, how can their nirvana or absorption into the deity remain without their personalities? Again, as it is impossible to conceive the existence of phenomena, say how is it possible to conceive the existence of the invisible Brahma in his own nature? By what mode of reasoning can this truth be known and ascertained? And this being accomplished, there remains nothing else to be inquired into." Vasistha replied, "This false knowledge or predisposition towards the reality of the world has long been prevalent, like a chronic disease, and must be removed only by the specific mantra of reasoning. However, it cannot be expelled quickly or in a minute. That requires some time, like the ascent and descent of an even-sided precipice. Therefore, listen to what I say in order to dispel your fallacy of the world through arguments, logical inference, and habitual meditation. Rama, listen to a tale that I am to tell you for your attainment of this knowledge. By hearing it, you will become intelligent, wise, and liberated. I will now talk about the subject of the production of the world in order to show you that all that is produced serves to bind our souls to the earth, so that you may live quite free from such bondage. I will tell you about creation and how the false conception of the world is as unsubstantial as emptiness itself. This world appears to contain moving and unmoving beings and abounds in various races of gods, spirits, kanaras, body of man and a head of a horse, storm gods and other demigods. All these become invisible and lose themselves in nothing at the ultimate dissolution of the world. Then there remains a moist and hollow deep without light and spread with a thick mist, everything undefined and undeveloped except something, that which is real and lasts forever. There was no air or form of anything, no sight or anything to be seen. There were no multitudes of created and material beings that appear to be endless and everlasting to view. There was a nameless self, the fullest of the full in its form. It was neither entity nor non-entity, neither reality nor unreality. It was mere intellect, without its exercise of intellect, infinite without decay, auspicious and full of bliss. It was without beginning, middle or end, eternal and imperishable. In him this world is manifest like a pearly goose in a painting. He is, and yet is not this creation. He is the soul of both what is real and unreal. He is without ears, tongue, nose, eyes, or touch, yet he hears, tastes, smells, sees, and feels everything, in all places and at all times. He is also that intellectual light whereby we discern the form of that real and unreal being in his perspective of creation, as the one without beginning or end, and as presenting an image without color or shade. He is that empty soul who views the world as clearly as the yogi with his half-closed eyes, who fixes his sight between his eyebrows and beholds him in the form of indescribable light. He is the cause of all, he whose cause is as nothing as the horns of a rabbit, and whose works, like so many waves of the sea, are all these worlds. His light is ever shining everywhere, and he has his seat in the human heart. It is from the candlelight of his consciousness that all the worlds derive their light. It is he without whose light the sun would dwindle into darkness, and whose existence alone gives the world its appearance of a mirage. It is his pulsation that vibrates throughout the universe, and it is his inertia that stops the course of the whole. It is one that pivot that the world has its revolution, just like the whirling firebrand describes a circle. His nature is pure and unchangeable. The works of creation and destruction are mere acts of his will in the persons of Brahma and Hara. It is his inertia and force that gives rest and motion to all things, like the ubiquitous course of the winds, but this is only a common belief that he moves. In reality, his nature is free from any and all change. He is always awake in his ever-sleeping state, and therefore cannot be said to be waking or sleeping anywhere at any time. He is both awake and asleep everywhere and at all time. His quiescence is attended with bliss and tranquility, and his agitation puts the world in motion and in its course of action, yet he is said to remain unaltered in both states which unite in him. He is inherent in all things as fragrance is innate in all flowers, and he is indestructible, like the fragrance remains after the flower is destroyed. He pervades all things, yet is as intangible as the whiteness of linen. He, though speechless, is the author of all speech and sound. Though he appears to be as unthinking as a stone, he is full of thought. He, though fully satisfied with his bliss, enjoys all things, although he requires nothing of himself. He, though without body, moves all the members of the body, and described in the Vedas as having 1,000 arms and eyes. He, having no support for himself, is yet the support of all, and pervades the whole without being seated anywhere. He, having no organs or organic power, is the organ of organs, and performs the functions of innumerable organs. Having no mind that senses, he exhibits endless design of his divine mind in the infinity of creation. It is because of our lack of knowledge of him that we are in constant dread of this delusive world, just as we are afraid of snakes. It is at his sight that all our fears and desires fly far away from us. It is in the presence of the clear light that the God of truth that all the wishes of our minds have a better play, just like actors dance best when they have light. It is by him that 100 types of visible objects arise every moment to our view, like the ceaseless series of waves, billows, and surges rising on the surface of the water. It is he who exhibits himself other than what he is in hundreds of different shapes to our mistaken minds, just like gold is made to appear in the various forms of bracelets, armlets, and 100 other sort of trinkets. He who manifests himself as the soul abiding in me, you and in every other person, yet is not me, you, he, or it, is the Supreme Soul, or the Self that is the same with and apart from all. It is he and the same being, whether you view him in one or more objects, as it is the same water that heaves itself in this and the other wave. Thus all visible phenomena have their rise from him. He from whom time has its counting, and that which can be seen has its appearance, by whom the mind exercises its thinking powers, and by whose light the world is enlightened, is the Supreme. Whatever forms, figures, and their actions, whatsoever flavors and odors, and what sounds, touch, feeling, perceptions there are, or that you can sense, know them all, and their cause also to be the Supreme. You will be able to know your own soul, O good Rama, if you can see with the vision that lies between the looker and the object looked upon. Know it as uncreated and indestructible, without beginning or end. It is the eternal and everlasting Brahma and bliss itself. It is immaculate and infallible, highly adorable, and without fault in its own nature. It is beyond all description and a mere void in its form. It is the cause of causes, and a notion of something that is unknowable. It is understanding and the inner faculty of the intellect or the mind. Book 3, Chapter 10. The emptiness upon universal dissolution is not empty. Description of God. Rama said, that which remains after the universal dissolution is commonly designated by the term formless void. Then how can you say that there was no void, light, or darkness? How could it be without the intellect and the living principle? How could the entities of the mind and understanding be lacking in it? How could there be nothing and not all things? You have used other similar paradoxical expressions that have created much confusion in me. Vasistha said, you have raised a difficult additional question, Rama, but I shall have no difficulty to solve it, just like the sun is at no pain to dispel the darkness of night. At the end of the great Kalpa age, when there remains that entity of God, it cannot be said to be a void, as I will now explain to you. Attend, Rama, and hear. Like images carved in bas relief upon a pillar, this world was made in relief upon that entity. It cannot be said to have been a void. Again, when there was the appearance of abundance under the name of the world, and be it real or unreal, it could not have been a void and empty. As a pillar with carved or painted figures cannot be said to be devoid of them, so Brahma exhibiting the worlds containing in him cannot become a void. But the world contained in Brahma becomes both something and nothing, just like billows and calm waters may exist either or not exist. Again, it happens that the hand of time marks certain figures in some places on some unconscious trees, and these marks are mistaken by people for images. So it comes to pass that certain figures of impermanent matter occur in the eternal mind, which men mistake for the real world. This comparison of the carved pillar, the tree, and the world is a partial and not complete simile. The similarity refers only to the impression of the transient world on the substance of the permanent Brahma. But this appearance of the world is not caused by another. It rises, lasts, and sets spontaneously and of itself in the same essence of Brahma. It is the nature of the divine soul and the mind to raise and set such images in them, like the creations of our imagination. The meaning of the word void, shunya, instead of no void, ashunya, or existence, is a fiction. It is as false as emptiness is a non-existence in nature. Something must come out of something, and never from a void nothing. How can nothing be reduced to nothing in the end? In answer to your second question, it has been said, and there was no darkness, because the divine light of Brahma, which existed before creation, is not like the light of a material luminary which is followed by darkness. The everlasting light cannot be hidden by darkness, like sunshine or moonlight or the blazing of a fire or the twinkling of stars or our eyes. What we call darkness is the absence of light from the great celestial sun. God having no material property in his immaterial essence, there could be no such light or darkness with him before creation. The light of the empty Brahma is an internal perception of the soul, and is only felt and perceived within oneself, and never externally by anyone. This spiritual light is never clouded by any mist or darkness of temporal objects. The indestructible Brahma is beyond and free from external invisible light and darkness. He is above the region of emptiness that is contained, as it were, within his bosoms, and contains the universe sheathed within his hollow womb. As there is no difference between the outside and inside of a fruit, so there is no shade of difference between Brahma and the universe. As a wave is contained in and composed of water, and a clay pot of the earth, so the world being contained in Brahma. It cannot be said to be null and void, but is full of the Spirit of God. The comparison of earth and water does not agree physically with the spiritual essence of God, whose empty spirit contains and comprises the whole Vishwa universe within itself, as those elements have their component parts and productions. Now, as the sphere of the intellect is far cleverer and brighter than the spheres of air and empty space, so the sense and idea of the word world in the divine mind is clear in a far greater degree than this visible world appears to us. In answer to the third question with regard to lack of intellect, it is said that like the pungency of a pepper is perceived by one who tastes it, and not by him who has never tasted it, so the minutiae of the intellect are known in the intellectual sphere by a cultivated intelligence, and not by one who is without it. Thus the intellect appears as no intellect to one who is devoid of intelligence in himself. So this world is seen in the Spirit of God or otherwise according to whether one has cultivated or neglected his spiritual knowledge. The world can be seen either in its outward form as other the Brahma, or in a spiritual light as the same with Brahma. The yogi views it in its fourth, turiya, state of utter extinction, susupta, deep sleep in his unconscious soul. Therefore the yogi, though leading a secular life, remains in deep sleep in his soul and tranquil, shanta, in his mind. He lives like Brahma, unknown to and unnoticed by others, and though knowing all and full of thoughts in himself, he is like a treasury of knowledge unknown to the rest of mankind. In answer to the question how corporeal beings could proceed from incorporeal Brahma, as waves of various shapes rise and fall in the still and shapeless breast of the sea, so innumerable worlds of various forms float about in the unaltered and formless emptiness of Brahma's bosom. From the fullness of the divine soul, Brahmatma, proceeds the fullness of the individual soul, Jivatma, that also is formless, Nirakriti. This aspect of Brahma is said to be owing to the purpose of manifesting himself as living in all living beings. So the totality of worlds proceed from the fullness of Brahma, yet the same totality remains as Brahma himself. Considering the world and our minds as synonymous with Brahma, we find their identity like one finds by taste that pepper and its pungency are the same thing. Such being the state of the unreality of the mind and what it can perceive, their reflections upon each other are as untrue as the shadow of a shadow. No Brahma is smaller than the smallest atom, and the minutest of minutest particles. He is purer than air, and more tranquil than the subtle ether that is enclosed in him. Unbounded by space or time, his form is the most extensive of all. He is without beginning or end, an indescribable light without brightness. He is of the form of cosmic consciousness, chit, and eternal life, without the conditions and accidents of life. The divine mind has its will eternal, and it is devoid of the desires of finite minds. Without consciousness, there is no life or understanding, no exercise of intellect, no organic action or sensation, and no mental desire or feeling whatever. Hence the being that is full of these powers, and who is without decline or decay, is seen by us to be seated in his state of tranquil emptiness, and is more subtle in the rarefied vacuum of the ethereal regions. Rama said, "Tell me again, and more precisely, without the form of this transcendental being, who is of the nature of infinite intelligence, so that I may have more light in my understanding." Vasistha said, "I have told you repeatedly that there is one supreme Brahma, the cause of causes, who remains alone by himself when the universe is finally dissolved or absorbed in him. Listen to me describe him fully to you. That which the yogi sees within himself in his samadhi meditation, after forgetting his personality and repressing the faculties and functions of the mind, is truly the form of the unspeakable being. The yogi absorbed in meditation without awareness of the visible world or any sense of the viewer or the viewed, and who sees the light shining in himself, is the form of that being. He who has forgotten the nature of the individual soul, jiva, and his tendencies towards phenomena remains in the pure light and tranquil state of his consciousness, and is the form of the Supreme Spirit. He who does not feel wind or the touch of anything upon his body, but lives as a mass of intelligence in this life, is truly the form of the Supreme. Again, that state of the mind which a man of sense enjoys in his long and deep sleep, undisturbed by dreams or gnats, is truly the form of the Supreme. That which abides in the hearts of emptiness, air and stone, and is the intellect of all inanimate beings, is the form of the Supreme. Again, whatever irrational and unconscious beings live by nature without soul or mind, the tranquil state of their existence is the nature of the Supreme Lord. That which is seated in the midst of the intellectual light of the soul, and what is situated in the midst of the ethereal light of the sun, and that which is in the midst of light that we can see, is truly the form of the Supreme. The soul that is the witness to our knowledge of solar and visual lights and darkness, and without beginning or end, is the form of the Supreme. He who manifests this world to us and keeps himself hidden from view, be he the same or distinct from the world, is the form of the Supreme. He, though full of activity, is as sedate as a rock, and who, though not emptiness appears to be empty, such is the form of the Supreme. He who is the source and end of our triple consciousness of the knower, known, and knowledge is most difficult of attainment. He who shines forth with the luster of the triple conditions of the knowable, knower, and their knowledge, and shows them to us as a larger unconscious mirror, is truly the form of the Supreme, who is not the cause but the source of the triple category. The mind liberated from bodily activities and its dreaming, remaining concentrated in the consciousness, abiding alike in all living as well as inert bodies, is said to remain in the end of our being. The intelligent mind that is as fixed as the immovable body, and is freed from the exercise of its faculties, can be compared to the divine mind. Book 3, Chapter 11. There can be no creation or dissolution of something that never existed. Rama said, "Tell me, O Holy One, where does this world go after its dissolution, when it does not retain its present form or its magnificent appearance?" Vasistha answered, "Tell me, Rama, what is the form of the barren woman's son? Where does he come from, and where does he go? Tell me also, where does a castle in the sky come from, and where does it go?" Rama replied, "There never was, nor is there, nor will there ever be a son of a barren woman, or a castle in the sky. Why do you ask me about the form and figure of something that is nothing?" Vasistha said, "As there never was a barren woman's son or a city in the air, so there never existed any scene such as that of the world. That which has no existence could not have come from anywhere, nor can it have its dissolution afterwards. So what can I tell you about its origin or demise?" Rama said, "The son of a barren woman and a city in the sky are mere fiction, but the visible world is not so, and it has both beginning and end." Vasistha replied, "It is hard to have a comparison where the subject and object of the comparison agree in all respects. The world and its objects allow no comparison other than with themselves. The appearance of the world is compared with that of a bracelet because the one is as false as the other, neither is real, and because there is nothing in the sky except negative emptiness, so the existence of the world in Brahma is only a negative idea. As the black eyeliner, collyrium, is nothing other than blackness, and there is no difference between frost and its coldness, so the world is not other than the great Brahma himself. As the property of coldness cannot be denied of the moon in frost, so one cannot describe creation as not being of God. Literally, creation is not a negative property of Brahma, but essential to his nature. As there is no water in a sea of the mirage, or light in a new moon, so this world as it is, in its gross state, does not abide in the pure Spirit of God. That which does not exist owing to the lack of any cause has no present existence, and cannot be destroyed. How is it possible for a dull material object to have any cause other than a material one? In the same way, it is not the light, but some solid substance, that is the cause of a shadow. But as none of these works has come into existence without some cause, that cause, whatever it is displayed in what it produced. Whatever appears as ignorance or illusion has some appearance of intelligence or truth, just like the illusion of the world seen in a dream displays the effect of our consciousness within us. Just like the illusion of the world in a dream is not without our inner consciousness of it, in the same way Brahma was not unconscious of the expansion of the world at the beginning of creation. All that we see about us is situated in the divine soul. There is no other world that rises and sets except what is imprinted in our mind. As fluidity is another name for water, and fluctuation the same with wind, and as sunshine is nothing other than light, so the world is nothing but Brahma displayed in nature. As the appearance of a city resides in the inner consciousness of a person who is conscious of his dreaming, in the same manner this world is displayed in the Supreme Soul. Rama said, "If this is so, then tell me, O Holy One, from where do we get our belief of its materiality? How is it that this unreal and visionary impression presents its baneful visible aspect to us? If the view is in existence, there must be its viewer also. And when there is the viewer, there is the view likewise. As long as either of these is in existence, there is bondage. Our liberation chiefly depends on the disappearance of both, which can hardly take place. It is entirely impossible to be liberated as long as our notion of the view is not lost in our minds. Unless the view is vanished both from the vision of the eyes and mind, no one can even form an idea in his mind of liberation. Again, the representation of the view at first and its obliterated afterwards are not enough for our liberation because the memory of the view is sufficient to bind the soul. Moreover, when the picture of the view is impressed on the soul and reflected in the mirror of the mind, there is no need for its recollection, for what is deeply rooted in the soul comes out of itself. The intellect, which at first was without the notion of phenomena, would be entitled to liberation, but once it is seen, it is taken on the impression of what it is seen. Now, sage, please use your reasoning to remove my hopelessness of liberation, which I imagine is unattainable by any." Vasistha said, "Hear me, Rama. Explain to you at length how the unreal world with all its contents appears to us as real. For unless it is explained to you by my reasoning, stories, and examples, this doubt will not subside and your breast like mud settles in a lake. Then, Rama, you will be able to conduct yourself on earth as one assured that the creation and existence of the world are false concepts. You will then remain like a rock against the impressions of wealth and poverty and of gain and loss, and whether your relation with anything is fleeting or lasting. Know that there is only one spirit which is self-existence. All else is mere fiction. I will now tell you how the three worlds were produced and formed. It was from him that all these beings have come into existence, while he of himself is all and everything in it. He likewise appears to us and disappears also, both as forms and their appearances, and as the mind and its faculties, and as figures and their shapes, and as modes and motions of all things." Book 3, Chapter 12. Detailed description of original creation, elements in their subtle form. Vasistha said, "From the state of perfect stillness and tranquility of the Supremely Holy Spirit, the universe rose to being in the manner that you must hear with your best understanding and attention. As sound sleep displays itself in visionary dreams, so Brahma manifests himself in the works of creation, of which he is the soul and receptacle. The world, which of its nature is continually progressive in its course, is identical with the essence of that being, whose form is self-same with the indescribable glory of his eternally brilliant intellect, Chintamanai, the wish-fulfilling jewel. This intellect, Chit, cosmic consciousness, before assuming to itself consciousness or the knowledge of self, gets of itself and in itself an exercise of intellection, a thought. This is the first stage in perception by the soul. Then this thinking intellect, Chetya, Chit, gets the notion, Bodha, knowledge or truth, of some faint images, Uhita Rupas, which are pure and lighter than air, and which receives their names and forms only later. The innate ideas are born before the embryonic mind or soul. Afterwards, this transcendental essence, intellect, consciousness, becomes an intelligent principle, Sachitta, eager for intelligence, Chaitana, is now worthy of its name as intellect or Chit on account of having attained what is called intelligence. Lastly, it takes the form of gross consciousness, Gana Sampadana, and receives the name of the individual soul, Jiva, as a living cosmic soul, or Hirnagarbha. It now loses its divine nature by reflecting on itself. Then this living principle is involved in thoughts relating only to the world, but its nature depends on the divine essence, as the fallacy of the snake depends on the substance of the rope. Afterwards, an empty space rises into being called calm or vacuum, which is the seed or source of the property of sound and which later becomes expressive of meaning. Next in order, the elements of egoism and duration are produced in the individual soul. These two terms are the roots of the existence of future worlds. This ideal knowledge in divine spirit of the unreal forms of the network of the world was made to appear as a reality by omnipotent power. Thus the ideal self-consciousness became the seed or root of that tree of desire that ego fluctuates in the form of the air. The intellect, in the form of airy ego, thinks on the element of sound in its subtle form, and it becomes by degrees denser than the rarefied air and produces the element of mind. Sound is the seed or root of words that later become diverse in the forms of names or nouns and significant terms. Words evolved and became as numerous as shoots on trees, and as varied as inflected speech, sentences, and collections of the Vedas and other scriptures. It is from the Supreme Spirit that all these worlds derive their beauty, and the multitude of words, which sprang from the sound, full of meaning, became widespread. Consciousness expressed as this family of its offspring is described as the living individual soul, jiva, which afterwards became the source of all forms of being known under a variety of expression. From this individual soul sprang the 14 kinds of living beings that fill the cells in the bowels of all worlds. It was then that consciousness, by a motion and inflation of itself, and as instantaneously as a thought, became the subtle form element, tanmatra, of touch and feeling the air, which was yet without name or action. This breath caused air, which expanded itself and filled all bodies that are objects of touch and feeling. The air, which is the seed or root of the tree of tangibles, then developed itself into branches composed of the various kinds of winds that cause breath and motion in all being. Then, at its pleasure, and from its idea of light, consciousness produced the elemental essence of luster, which later received its different names: sunlight, moonlight, starlight, firelight, lightning. Then the sun, fire, lightning, and others that are the seeds or roots of the tree of light caused the various colors that filled the world. Consciousness reflected on the lack of fluidity and produced the liquid body of water, whose taste constitutes the element, tanmatra, of flavor in its subtle form. The desire of the soul for different flavors, rasa, bliss, is the seed of the tree of taste, and it is by the relish of a variety of tastes that the world is to go on its course. Then the self-willed Brahma, wishing to produce the visible earth, caused the property of smell to appertain to it from its own subtle element of it. He made his elemental solidity the seed or source of the tree of forms, as he made his own element of roundness underlie the spherical world. These elements are all evolved from consciousness and remain with consciousness, just like bubbles of water rise and subside in itself. In this manner all beings remain in their combined states until their final dissolution into simple and separate forms. All things which are only forms and formations of pure intellect remain within the sphere of divine intelligence, as the subtle form of a big banyan tree resides in the form of pollen and seed. These sprouted forth in time and burst out into 100 branches. Having been concealed in an atom, they become as big as if they were to last forever. Such is the growth and multiplication of things within consciousness until development is stopped by its contraction, then weakened in their bodies by its desertion, until they droop down in the end. In this way the elements in their subtle forms, tanmatras, are produced in consciousness out of its own volition, and are manifested to sight in the form of formless minutiae. These five-fold elements are only the seeds of all things in the world. They are seeds of the primary momentum that was given to them in the beginning. To our way of thinking, they are the seeds of elementary bodies, but in their real nature they are the uncreated ideal shapes of consciousness replenishing the world. Book 3, Chapter 13, On the Production of the Self-Born. Vasistha said, Rama, when the Supreme Brahman remains in his resplendent and tranquil state before creation, there is no essence of ethereal light or heat or even darkness produced in the intellectual spirit, but they lie hidden there as if buried in oblivion. The being Sat, that is God, begins with the attribute of intellectuality, chetya. It is from the exercise on intellect, Chaitana, intuitive consciousness of his intellectual part, that the name of mind, Chitta, the memory aspect of mind, is attributed to him. The faculties, Shakti, power, of his intellect, Chit, universal consciousness, are called its intelligence, Chaitana, life, spirit, visible, conscious. Cosmic consciousness, Chit, or intellect, from its intelligence, Chaitana, then has the attribute of the individual soul, Jiva, and connection with the intelligible objects in nature. Then when it is subject to intelligible objects having a subtle, elemental form of the sense of individual self, it can be named Maya or illusion. Then from the excess of its egoism, Ahanta, that is full with the purpose of its mind and of the elements of sound and other sensitive objects, it has the attribute of understanding, Buddhi, individual intelligence, the intuitive faculty of direct intelligence controlling the sense organs, the organ of mind responsible for discrimination and judgment. This living, deluded, and self-reflecting ego is puffed up with thoughts of all things and looks upon the great tree of the visible world as the great garden for its pleasure and gain. Living souls, like so many impermanent objects seen in a dream, are made to rise and fall one after the other in this great forest of the world surrounded by skies and space. But the world as is continuous as a grove of Karanja plants that grow from unsown seeds, and its elements of water, fire, earth, and air have no regard for anyone living or dead. The consciousness, that is the soul of the universe, creates the earth and all other things, like one remembers his dreams. Wherever there is the germ of the world, it develops itself in that place. The live elements are the fivefold seed of the world, but the undecaying consciousness is the seed of the fivefold elements, earth, water, fire, air, and space. As a seed, so is its fruit. Therefore, know the world in as a form and full of God. Know the spacious sky is the reservoir of the five elements in the beginning of creation. The soul, like the body, is composed of the powers of consciousness and does not exist of itself. By being inflated by consciousness, it extends its bulk. But the empty form of consciousness, seated in the spiritual body of the soul, cannot be composed of solid reality. This is not possible. Therefore, nothing can come from an impossibility. Again, that which is changeable in its form cannot have its sameness all the time. Therefore, if the substance of the five elements is attributed to Brahma, from an idea within the essence of his spirit, there can be no immaterial and unchanging Brahma. That is, Brahma would have to also be material and subject to change. Therefore, know these five elements are the developed Brahma himself, as he evolved from in the beginning, and he is their producer for the creation of the world. He being the prime cause of their production, there is nothing that exists without him, and the world is no product of itself. The unreal appears as real, just like a city is seen in dreams, and like a castle built in the air by our hope. In the same way, we place the individual soul in ourselves, which has its foundation in the empty Spirit of God. Thus the brilliant spirit situated in the divine intellect, being no earthly or any other material substance, is called the individual soul and remains in emptiness like a luminous body rising in the sky. Hear now how this empty individual soul, after its detachment as a spark from the totality of vital spirits, comes to be embodied in the human body within the empty sphere of divine consciousness. At first the soul thinks it is like a minute particle of light. Then it considers itself to be growing in the sphere of its consciousness. The unreal, appearing real, in the end proves to be unreal. Just like an imaginary moon becomes nothing, so the soul continues to see itself subjectively and objectively both as the viewer and the view. Thus the single self becomes double. Just as one sees his own death in a dream, thus it waxes into bigness and thinks its vital spark is a star. This is the form of the linga deha within the body, the sentient soul, the subtle or astral body. As the soul continues to think of itself as a microcosm of the universe, Vishwarupa, it falsely thinks itself to be within such reality, a thought expressed by Soham, so am I. By thinking of himself this way, a man comes to believe it to be true. Just like one believes himself to be a traveler in his dreams, so by thinking the soul as a star or light body, he views it so within himself. By continually thinking about his soul this way, he loses his external sensation and views this star in his head. He sees the soul within himself as though it exists without him, just like the mirror reflects a distant hill in itself. He sees the soul confined within himself like a body stuck in a well, and like a sound is confined in the hollow of a cave. Consciousness of our dreams and desires is an attribute of the individual soul, whose real form is that of a star keeping watch within us. Now this empty life composed of the essence of the mind, understanding and knowledge, resides in the hollow sheath of the star. It appears to me to take flight to the sky in order to see what is passing there. Then it enters the body by two holes which later are named the external organs of sight. The organs by which the embodied individual soul is to see are called the eyes. That by which it feels is called its skin. Those whereby it hears are ears, the organ of smell is a nose, and that which conducts flavor to the spirit, the sense of taste, is a tongue. Then there is breathing air, the breath of life, which moves the energy of the organs of action. It is this air which is the cause of vision and the mover of the internal organs of mind and thought. Vital breath supports the body and the all-supporting soul in the emptiness of the body, and fills and kindles it like air kindles a spark of fire. The word jiva, or the individual soul, has a figurative meaning, something real in the unreal body. Hence Brahma is said to be the life and soul of the unreal world. The gross embodied soul is in the form of emptiness, like the mind, yet it imagines itself to reside in an egg-shaped space inside the body, as Brahma is supposed to be seated in the cosmic egg. Some view the spirit of God as floating on the surface of the water, in the form of Narayana. Others view it in the person of the Lord of creatures, Pashupti Shiva. There are others who look at the Spirit of God as infused throughout the creation in the figure of Viraj, the primordial man. These are called the subtle and gross bodies of the soul. The soul or spirit is the spacious womb of production. It is the means of executing its own purpose and of knowing the proper time and place. It is the article and the manner of action. The mind is the inventor of words, expressive of ideas in the soul, and subjects itself to the arbitrary sounds of its own invention. Hence, in this world of error, God is falsely said to be embodied in the words, Brahma of speech, of miasma philosophy. The unproduced and self-born Brahma that has risen of himself and represents the mind is as unreal a man dreaming he is flying in the sky. This all-supporting and embodied soul is the Creator-Lord of creatures, who is said to have formed this illusory frame of the world. But in reality nothing was formed or born, nor is there any substance to be found in the world. It is still the same empty form of Brahma whose essence is known to extend as the infinite space itself. Things that appear to be real are as unreal as an imaginary city. They present a variety of forms and colors to the fancy, but they have been built or painted by anyone. Nothing that is unmade or unthought of can be real, and the god Brahma and others, being freed from their business at the universal dissolution of existence, can neither resume their functions to make or have materials with which to make. The self-born Brahma, having neither memory of the past nor any material with which to work, would not be able either to form an ideal or to make anything material. Therefore, Brahma producing anything and any formation of the universe are both impossible. The earth and all other existence are the eternal idea of the divine mind. They appear to us to be objects in a dream that is our waking state. The divine spirit is known only as emptiness. Therefore, the world must also be emptiness, because like produces like. So all waters are liquid, though they are made to pass under different names. This creation is everywhere the same in the Supreme Spirit. It is only an evolution of the same, and the Creator is always and everywhere unchanging in his nature. The empty universe, under the name of the cosmic egg, shines as clearly as a divine spirit. It is calm in its appearance and becomes disturbed by cause born in itself. It is supported by the unsupported supporter of all, who is one and without a second, but devoid of unity in creation. All this is born in his consciousness, and therefore there is nothing new that is produced. He who is of the form of unlimited space, without any emptiness in it, who is transparent, yet teeming with abundance, and who is the whole world without any worldliness in him, truly underlies everything. He who is neither the container nor the contained, nor the appearance of the world, who is neither the world nor its creator, and about whom there can be no dispute or disputant, is truly the unknown God. He who is neither the passing world nor any of its passing things, who is quite at rest yet situated in all things, whether moving or quiescent, is the only Brahma that shines of himself in himself. The idea of the fluidity of water allows our minds to form an image of a whirlpool. In the same way, the sight of the world produces the false notion of its reality in the mind. All unrealities become extinct at the end, As we see the death of our frail bodies in dreams, the essential part of our soul remains unscathed because of its own nature of indestructibility in the form of everlasting consciousness in the atmosphere of our intellects. Brahma, the prime lord of creatures, is ever manifest by himself in the form of emptiness in the Supreme Spirit. He, being of a spiritual form, like the mind, has no material body formed of earth or any other material. Therefore, he is both real and unborn. Book 3, Chapter 14. No individual souls, only one Brahma. Each is Brahma. Brahma creates the rules and delegates. Vasistha added, in this manner the visible world, I, you, and all other things are nothing. Being unmade and unborn, they are non-existent. It is only the Supreme Spirit that exists of itself. The primeval empty soul first is awakened of itself by its own energy from its quietness, then begins to have motion in itself like the troubled waters of the deep. Then it begins to reflect in itself, like in a dream or imagination, without changing its empty form, like a rock with an inner faculty of thought. The body of the great god Viraj, untainted, is also devoid of any material form. Whether earthly or any other elemental shape, it is purely a spiritual, intellectual, and ethereal form, as transparent as the ether itself. It is without decay, steady like a rock, and as airy as a city seen in a dream. It is inert as a line of regimented painting in a picture. All other souls are like pictures of dolls and puppets painted, and not engraved, and the body of Viraj like a huge pillar. He, standing as an uncarved column in the empty sphere of Brahma, represents all souls, and not bodies, as they are mere pictures on it. The prime lord of creatures is said to be self-born. He is known as the uncreated Brahma, for want of his prior acts to cause his birth. The primeval patriarchs or progenitors who obtain their ultimate liberation at the final dissolution of the world have no antecedent cause to be reborn as unliberated mortals. Brahma, who is the reflector of all souls, is himself invisible in the inward mirror of other souls. He is neither the view nor the viewer, and neither the creation nor the creator himself. Therefore, although Brahma has nothing that can be described, and has nothing that may be affirmed or denied about him, yet he is the soul of everything that can be described. He is the source of these chains of living beings, just as light is the cause of a line of lighted lamps and illumination. The will of the gods, Brahma and Viraj, proceeding from the volition of Brahma, is of the same spiritual nature as the other, just as one dream rising in another is equally as insubstantial as the first. Hence all individual souls evolved from the breathing of the Supreme Spirit are of the same nature as their origin, because there is nothing else that could cause or contribute towards cause. Lack of a secondary agency produces the equality of effects and their cause. Hence the uniformity of created things proves wholly false any conception of their creation by a secondary cause. Brahma himself is the prime soul of Viraj, and is identical with him, and Viraj is the soul of creation and identical with it. He is the empty vitality of all, and it is from him that the unreal earth and other things have their rise. Viraj is the Spirit of God diffused in nature. Rama said, "Tell me whether the individual soul is a limited thing or an unlimited mass of life, or does the unbounded Spirit of God exist in the shape of a mountain heap of individual souls? Are these individual souls like showers of rain falling from above, or like the drizzling drops of waves in the vast ocean of creation, or like the sparks of fire struck out of a red-hot iron? From where do they flow, and by whom are they emitted? Sage, tell me the truth concerning the profusion of individual souls. Though I have a partial knowledge of it, I require your more complete and clear explanation." Vasistha replied, "There is only one individual soul of the universe, so you cannot call it a multitude. Therefore your question is quite out of place, like a question about the horns of rabbits. There is no detached individual souls, O Rama, nor are they to be found in multitudes anywhere, nor was there a mountainous heap of souls known to have existed at any time. Jiva, the individual soul, is only a fictitious word with many more fictions heaped upon it, all of which, as you must know for certain, does not apply to the soul. There is only one pure and immaculate Brahma who is mere consciousness, and all-pervasive. He assumes to himself all attributes by his almighty power. Here Brahma is represented not only as omniscient and omnipotent, but also as Saguna, with attributes, by his assumptive of all attributes. Many regard the individual soul as evolving itself from consciousness into the many visible and invisible forms. Murta muttam. Just like a plant is seen to develop itself into its fruits and flowers, they add the attributes of the living principle, understanding, action, motion, mind and unity and duality, to the soul as if they appertain to its nature. But all this is caused by ignorance, while right understanding assigns them to Brahma. The ignorant are bewildered by these different views of the soul, and they will not be awakened to sense. These different believers are lost in their various views like light is lost under darkness. They will never come to the knowledge of truth. Know that Brahma himself is the individual soul, without any divisibility or distinction. He is without beginning or end. He is omnipotent, and is of the form of the great consciousness which forms his essence. His lack of minuteness, his fullness, in all places precludes the ability to give him any distinctive name. Whatever attributes are given to him are all to be understood to mean Brahma himself. Rama asked, "How is it, O Holy One, that the totality of the individual souls in the world is guided by the will of one universal soul that governs the whole and to which all others are subject?" Vasistha replied, "Brahma, the great individual soul and omnipotent power remain from eternity with his will to create without partition or alteration of himself. Whatever is wished by that great soul comes to take place immediately. The wish at first formed in its unity became a positive duality at last. Then its wish to be many became separate existence afterwards. All these dualities of his self-divided powers, the different individual souls, had their several routines of action allotted to them, such as this is for that, meaning this being is for that duty and such action is for such an end. Thus, though there can be no act without effort, by general rule as in the case of mortals, yet the predominant will of Brahma is always prevailing without effort to action. Though living beings affect their purpose by exertion of their energies, yet they can effect nothing without acting according to the law appointed by the predominant power. If the law of the predominant power is effective to attain an end, then the exertion of the subordinate power, the individual soul, to that end must also be successful. Thus Brahma alone is the great individual soul that exists forever and without end, and these millions of living beings in the world are nothing other than agents of the divine energies. It is with consciousness of the intellectual soul, the inner knowledge of God within themselves, that all individual souls are born in this world. But losing that consciousness or their knowledge of God afterwards, they become alienated from him. Hence men of inferior souls should pursue the course of conduct led by superior souls in order to regain their spiritual life, just like copper becomes transformed into gold by a chemical process. Thus the whole body of living beings that had been as non-existent as air before comes into existence and rises resplendent with wondrous intellect. Whoever perceives this wonderful intellect in his mind then gets a body and the consciousness of his egoism, is said to be an embodied individual soul. The mind gratified with intellectual delights becomes as expanded as the intellect itself and thinks those pleasures constitute the sum total of worldly enjoyments. Consciousness is said to remain unchanged in all its succeeding stages, and although it never changes from that state, yet it awakes or develops by a power intrinsic in itself. The uninterrupted activity of consciousness indulges itself in the amusement of manifesting phenomena in the form of the world. The extent of the intellectual faculty is wider and more rarefied than the surrounding air, yet it perceived its distinct egoism by itself and of its own nature. Its knowledge of self springs of itself, in itself, like water in a fountain. It perceives itself, its ego, to be only an atom amidst endless worlds. It also perceives in itself the beautiful and wonderful world, which is amazing to understanding, and which therefore is named the universe. Now, Rama, our egoism, being only a conception of the intellect, is a mere fiction, kalpana. The elementary principles being only creatures of egoism, they are also fictions of the intellect. Again, the individual soul being only a result of our act and desires, you have to renounce these causes in order to get rid of your knowledge of I and you. And then, after discarding the fictions of the real and unreal, you attain the knowledge of the true one. As the sky looks as clear as before after the shadows of clouds are dispersed from it, so the soul, after its overshadowing fictions have been removed, looks as bright as it existed at first in consciousness. The universe is a vacuum, and the world is a name for the field of our exertion. The emptiness is the abode of the gods, Vishwa and Viraj, both of whom are formless. The wonderful frame of plastic nature is only a form of the formless consciousness and nothing else. One's nature never leaves him at any time. How then can a form or figure be given to the formless divinity? Divine intellect is exempt from all the names and forms given to unintelligent worldly things, it pervading and enlivening all that shines in the world. Intellect or consciousness is the power of understanding. The mind, understanding and egoism, with the five elements, hills, skies, and all other things that compose and support the world, are made of essences proceeding from consciousness. The intellect, gathering information, contains all things. Know that the world is the mind, chitta, of the consciousness, chit of God, because mind does not exist without the world. If the world did not exist, that would prove that the mind and consciousness, which consists of the world, do not exist. Therefore, the intelligent world is identical to the mind and intellect of God. The intellect, like the pepper seed, possesses an exquisite property within itself. Like the flavor of pepper, the intellect has the element of the individual soul, which is the element of animated nature. As the mind exerts its power and assumes its sense of egoism, it derives the principle of the individual soul from the intellect. With its breath of life and action, it is afterwards called a living being. The mind is what thinks, moves, and acts. Consciousness, chit, exhibiting itself as the mind, chitta, bears the name of the purpose it has to accomplish, which, being temporary and changeable, is different from consciousness and a non-existence. The distinction of actor and act does not consist in consciousness, it being eternal. Neither is consciousness the author or the work itself. But the individual soul, which is active and productive of acts, is called Purusha, the embodied soul residing in the body. It is action which makes a man Purusha, from which is derived his manhood, Parusha. Life with the action of the mind constitutes the mind of man. The mind, taking a sensitive form, employs the organs of sense to their different functions. He, the consciousness, whose radiant light is the cause of infinite blessings to the world, is both its author and the workmanship from all eternity. There is none beside him. Hence the ego, or individual soul, in its essence, is indivisible, uninflammable, and incapable of being soiled or dried. It is everlasting and infinite, and as immovable as a mountain. There are many that dispute this point, as they are in error, dispute other matters, and mislead others in the same errors. But we are set free from all mistakes. The dualist, who makes a distinction between eternal and created souls, relying on phenomena, is deceived by their varying appearance, but the believer in the formless unity relies on the everlasting blessed Spirit. Fondness for intellectual culture is attended with the spring blossoms of intellect that are as white as the clear sky and as numberless as parts of time. Consciousness exhibits itself in the form of the boundless and wonderful universal egg, and it breathes out the breath of its own spirit in the same egg. Then it shows itself in the wonderful form of the primordial waters, not as they rise from spring or fall under reservoirs, but like those substances that constitute the bodies of the best of being. It next shines forth with its own intellectual light, which shines as bright as the humid beams of the full moon. Then as consciousness rise in full light with its internal knowledge, phenomena disappear from sight. In the same way, consciousness is transformed to dullness by dwelling upon gross objects, when it is said to be laying dormant. In this state of consciousness it is lowered and confined to the earth. The world is in motion by force of consciousness, in whose great emptiness it is settled. The world is lighted by the light of that consciousness, and is therefore said to both exist and not exist by itself. Like the emptiness of that intellect, the world is said now to exist and now to be non-existent. Like the light of that intellect, the world now appears and now disappears from view. Like the fleeting wind breathed by the intellect, the world is now in existence and now non-existent. Like the cloudy and unclouded sphere of the intellect, the world is now in being and now not in being. Like the broad daylight of the intellect, the world is now in existence, and like the disappearance of that light, it now becomes nothing. It is formed of the active, rajas, quality of the intellect, like black collyrium eyeliner made from particles of oil. It is intellectual fire that gives warmth to the world. It is the alabaster of the intellect that causes its whiteness. The rock of intellect gives its hardness, and its water causes its fluidity. The sweetness of the world is derived from the sugar of the intellect, and its juices from the milk of the divine mind. Its coldness is from the ice, and its heat from the fire contained in the same. The world is oily by the mustard seed contained in consciousness, and billowy in the seed of divine mind. It is sweet by the honey and golden by the gold contained in the same. The world is a fruit of the tree of consciousness, and its fragrance is derived from the flowers growing in the tree of the mind. It is the existence of consciousness that gives the world its being, and it is the mold of the eternal mind that gives its form. The difference is that this world is changing, while the clear atmosphere of consciousness has no change in it. The unreal world becomes real when it is seen as full of divine spirit. The unchanging sameness of the divine spirit makes the existence and non-existence of the world the same. The words part and whole are wholly meaningless because both are full with divine spirit. Shame on those who deride ideas as false talk, because the world with its hills, seas, earth, and rivers is all untrue without the idea of God's presence in it. Consciousness, being a unity, cannot be mistaken for a part of anything. Though it may become as solid as a stone, yet it shines brightly in the sphere of emptiness. It has a clear, empty space in its inside, like a transparent crystal, that reflects the images of all objects, though it is clear as a sky. As the lines of the leaves of trees are neither parts of the leaves nor distinct from them, so the world situated in consciousness is not part of it or separate from it. No detached soul is a varied growth, but retains in its nature the nature of consciousness, and Brahma is the primary cause of causes. The mind is of its own nature a causal principle, by reason of its idea of the intellect, but its existence is hard to prove when it is insensible and unconscious of the intellect. Whatever is in the root comes out in the tree, just as we see seeds shoot forth in plants of its own species. All the worlds are as empty as emptiness, yet they appear otherwise because they are situated in the great consciousness. All this is the seat of the Supreme, and you must know it by your exercise of intellect. Valmiki speaking. As the sage spoke these words, the day declined to its evening twilight. The assembly broke with mutual salutations to perform their evening rituals, and after dispersion of the nocturnal gloom met again at the court hall with the rising sunbeams. Book 3, Chapter 15. Story of Leela and Saraswati, Padma's body on the shrine. Vasistha said, "The world is a void and as null as the pearls in the sky, seen by optical illusion. It is as unreal as the soul in the emptiness of consciousness. All its objects appear like unengraved images on the column of the mind that is without any engraving or engraver. As the motion of waters in the sea causes waves to rise to themselves, so phenomena as they appear to us are like waves in the calm spirit of the Supreme. Like sunbeams seen under water, and like water appearing in the sands of the desert mirage, so it is fancy that paints the world as true to us. The world's bulk is like that of an atom appearing like a hill. The fancied world is no more than a facsimile of the mind of its maker, just as sunbeams under water are only reflections of the light above, a false idea. The ideal world is only a castle in the air, and this earth is as unreal as a dream and as false as the object of our desire. In the light of philosophy, the earth that appears solid is no better than the water in the mirage of a sandy desert. It is never inexistent. In this supposed substantial form of the world, the elusive forms of phenomena resemble only castles in the sky and rivers in a mirage. If the visible scenes of the world were to be weighed on scales, they would be found to be as light as air and as hollow as a vacuum. The ignorant, taken away by the sound of words as disregard of their meanings, when they come to their senses, will find that there is no difference between the world and Brahma. The dull world is the issue of consciousness, like sky is of sunbeams. The light of consciousness is like the light of the rarefied rays of the sun, like water from huge clouds causes seeds to shoot into plants. As a city in a dream is finer than one seen in the waking state, so this world that can be seen is as subtle as an imaginary one. Therefore know the dream world to be the inverse of the conscious soul, and the substantive world to be the reverse of the insubstantial vacuum. The words fullness and vacuum are both as empty as airy breath, because these opposites are only different views of the same consciousness. Therefore know that this visible world is no production at all. It is as nameless as it is undeveloped, and as non-existent as its seeming existence. The universe is the sphere of the Spirit of God in infinite space. It has no foundation elsewhere except in that Spirit, of which it is only a particle filling a space equal to a bit of infinity. It is as transparent as the sky, and without any solidity at all. It is as empty air, and like a city pictured in imagination. Attend now to the story of the temple, which is pleasant to hear, and which will impress this truth deeply in your mind. Rama said, "Tell me at once, O Holy One, the long and short of the story of the temple, which will help my understanding of these things." Vasistha said, "In the past, on the surface of the earth, there lived a king named Padma, lotus, because he was like the blooming and fragrant lotus of his race. Padma was equally blessed with wisdom, prosperity, and good children. He observed the bounds of his duties, just as the sea preserves the boundaries of countries. He destroyed the mist of his adversaries, like the sun dispels the darkness of night. He was like the moon to his lotus-like queen, and like burning fire to the hay of evils and crimes. He was the asylum of the learned, like Mount Meru is the residence of the gods. He was the moon of fair fame, risen from the ocean of the earth. He was like a lake to the geese of good qualities, and like the sun to the lotus of purity. In warfare he was like a blast to the vines of the antagonists. He was like a lion to the elephant's desires of his mind. He was the favorite of all learning, a patron of the learned, and a mind of all admirable qualities. He stood fixed like Mount Mandara after it had churned the ocean of the demons. He was like spring season to the blossoms of joy, and like the god of the floral bowl to the flowers of blooming prosperity. He was a gentle breeze to the shimmering of playful vines, and like the god Vishnu in his valor and energy. He shone like the moon on the florets of good manners, and like wildfire to the brambles of licentiousness. His consort was the happy queen Leela, play, playful as her name implied, and filled with every grace, as if Lakshmi, the goddess of prosperity, had appeared in person upon earth. She was gentle with her submission to her lord, and was sweet in her speech without art. She was always happy and slow in her movements, and ever smiling as the moon. Her lovely lotus-white face was decorated with painted spots, and her fair form, fresh as a new-blown bud, appeared like a moving bed of lotuses. She was buxom as a playful plant, and bright as a branch of kunda jasmine flowers, full of glee and good humor. With her palms red like coral and her fingers white as lilies, she was in her person collection of spring beauties. Her pure form was sacred to touch and conferred joy to the heart, like the holy stream of the Ganges exhilarates a flock of swans floating upon it. Leela was like a second Rati born to serve her lord. Padma was Kama in person on earth to give joy to all souls. She was sorry at his sorrow and delighted to see him delightful. She was thoughtful to see him pensive. Thus she was an exact picture of her lord, except that she was afraid to find him angry. Book 3, Chapter 16. The Lives of Queen Leela and King Padma. Leela performs tapas to Saraswati Padma's death. This husband with a single wife enjoyed the pleasures of an undivided and sincere love in the company of his only consort, just as with a heavenly nymph, Apsara on earth. The seats of their youthful play were gardens and groves, tree gardens of shrubs and forests of tomorrow trees. They also played in pleasant tree gardens of vines and delightful alcoves of flowers. They delighted themselves in the inner apartments on his bed decked with fragrant flowers, and on walks strewn with fresh blossoms. In spring they amused themselves in the swinging cradles of their pleasure garden, and in the summer heat they rowed in their boats. Their favorite summer resorts were hills overgrown with sandalwood in the shade of forests, the groves of nipa and kadamba trees, and canopies of parabada and devadaru cedars. They sat beside beds of kunda and mandara plants, fragrant with the smell of full-blown flowers, and they strayed about the spring-green woods, resounding with the melody of nightingale notes. They enjoyed the glossy beds of grassy tufts, the mossy seeds of woods and lawn, and waterfalls flooding the level lands with showers of rain. They often visited mountain ledges overlaid with gems, minerals, and richest stones, as well as the shrines of gods and saints, holy hermitages, and other places of pilgrimage. They frequently haunted lakes of full-blown lotuses and lilies, smiling komudas of various colors, and woodlands darkened by green foliage and overhung with flowers and fruit. They passed their time in the amorous dalliance of godlike youth. Their personal beauty was graced by their generous pastime of their mutual fondness and affection. They amused each other with clever remarks and witticisms and solution of riddles, with storytelling and playing tricks of hold fists, and with various games of chess and dice. They diverted themselves by reading dramas and stories, by interpreting stanzas difficult even for the learned, and sometimes they roamed about cities, towns, and villages. They decorated their bodies with wreaths of flowers and ornaments of various kinds. They feasted on a variety of flavors, and moved about with playful negligence. They chewed betel leaves mixed with moistened mace, camphor, and saffron. They hid the love marks on their body under the wreath of flowers and corals that adorned them. They frolicked playing hide-and-seek, tossing wreaths and garlands, and swinging one another in cradles decorated with flowers. They went on trips in pleasure boats and on yokes of elephants and tame camels. They played in their pleasure ponds by splashing water on each other. They had their manly and feminine dances, the sprightly Tandava and the merry Lysa. They sang songs with masculine and feminine voices, the Kala and the Giti. They had enjoyed harmonious and pleasing music played string and percussion instruments. In their flowering conveyance they passed through gardens and pathways, by rivers and on highways, and into the inner apartments of their royal palaces. The loving and beloved Queen Leela, being thus brought up in pleasure and indulgence, and at one time thought within herself with a wistful heart, "How will my Lord and ruler of earth, who is in the bloom of youth and prosperity, and who is dearer to me than my life, be free from old age and death? And how will I enjoy his company on beds of flower in the palace, possessed of my youth and free will, for long, long hundreds of years? Therefore I will endeavor with all my vigilance, prayers, austerities, and efforts to know how this moon-faced prince may become free from death and decline. I will ask the most knowing, the most austere, and the very learned Brahmins how men may evade death." She accordingly invited the Brahmins and honored them with presents, and humbly asked them to tell her how men might become immortal on earth. The Brahmins replied, "Great Queen, holy men may obtain success in everything by their austerities, prayers, and observance of ritual rites, but nobody can ever attain to immortality here below." Hearing this from the mouth of the Brahmins, she thought again in her own mind, and with fear for the death of her loving lord, "Should it happen that I come to die before my lord, then I shall be released from all pain of separation from him, and be quite at rest in myself. But if my husband should happen to die before me, even after 1,000 years of our lives, I shall so manage it that his soul may not depart from the confines of this house. The spirit of my lord will rove about the holy vault in this inner apartment, and I shall feel the satisfaction of his presence at all times. For this purpose I will start this very day to worship Saraswati, the goddess of wisdom, and offer my prayers to her, and observe fasts and other rites to my heart's content." Having so determined, she began to observe the strict rituals of the Scriptures without her lord's knowledge. She kept her fasts and broke them at the end of every third night. She entertained the gods, Brahmins, priests, and holy people with feasts and due honors. She performed her daily ablutions. She distributed alms, and she practiced austerities and meditation. In all of these she was painstakingly observant of the rules of pious devotion. She also attended to her unaware husband at the stated times. To the utmost she took care of him and performed her duties as required by law and custom. Thus observant of her vows, with resolute and persevering painstaking and unfailing austerity, the young queen passed 100 and her 3-night ceremonies. Saraswati, the fair goddess of speech, was pleased at the completion of Leela's 100th 3-night ritual in the goddess's honor, performed with all outward and spiritual courtesy. The goddess spoke to her, saying, "I am pleased, my child, with your continued devotion to me, and your constant devotion to your husband. Now ask the boon that you would have of me." Queen Leela replied, "Be victorious, O moon-bright goddess, to end all the pains of our birth and death, and the troubles, affliction, and evil of this world. Like the sun, put to flight the darkness of our affections and afflictions in this life. Save me, O goddess and parent of the world. Have pity on this wretched devotee, and grant her those 2 boons that she begs of you. This one is that after my husband is dead, his soul may not go beyond the precinct of the shrine in the inner apartment. The second is that whatever I call you, you shall hear my prayer, appear before me, and give me your sight and blessing." Hearing this, the goddess Saraswati said, "Be it so," and immediately disappeared in the air, just like a wave subsides in the sea from where it had come into view. The queen, being blessed by the presence and good grace of the goddess, was as delighted as a doe at hearing sweet music. The wheel of time rolled on its 2 semicircles of fortnights, the spikes of months, the arcs of seasons, the loops of days and nights, and the orbits of years. The axle composed of fleeting moments gave constant momentum to the wheel. The perceptions of King Padma entered into his subtle body, and in a short time he looked as dry as a withered leaf without its juicy gloss. The dead body of the warlike king was laid over a tomb inside the palace. Queen Leela began to fade away at its side, like a lotus flower without the waters of its birth. Her lips grew pale from the hot and poisoned breath of her sorrow. She was in the agony of death, like a doe mortally wounded by an arrow. At the death of her lord, her eyes were covered in darkness, like a house becomes dark when its light is extinguished. In her sad melancholy she became leaner, even more, and was mute as a statue. She was about to die of grief, like a ruddy goose at the separation of her mate. Then the ethereal goddess Saraswati took pity on the excess of her grief, and showed as much compassion for Leela's relief as the first shower of rain does to dying fishes in a dry pond. Book 3, Chapter 17. Leela sees Padma and his court in the spirit world, checks her own court to make sure it still exists. Saraswati said, "My child, move the dead body of your husband over to that shrine, strew those flowers over it, and you shall have your husband again. Never will this body rot or fade as long as the flowers are fresh over it. Know that your husband will shortly return to life again. His individual soul, pure as air, will never leave the cemetery of your inner apartment." The black-eyed queen, her eyebrows resembling a cluster of black bees, heard the goddess's consolatory speech and was cheered in spirit, like a lotus bed upon return of the rains. She placed the corpse of her husband on the shrine, hid it under flowers, and remained in expectation of its rising, like a poor man fosters hope of finding the treasure. It was at midnight of the very day when all the members of the family had fallen fast asleep that Leela went to the shrine in the inner apartment. There, in the recesses of her understanding, she meditated on the goddess of knowledge, and called her in earnest from the sorrow of her heart, when she heard the divine voice addressing her. "Why do you call me, child? Why are you so sorrowful in your face? The world is full of errors, glaring as false water in a mirage." Leela answered, "Tell me, goddess, where does my husband reside at present? What has he been doing? Take me to his presence, as I am unable to bear the load of my life without him." Saraswati replied, "His spirit is now wandering in the sky, of which there are three kinds: the physical, the firmament, or region of the worlds that can be sensed; the other is mental, the region of the mind, the seat of will and creation; and the third is the spiritual region of consciousness, which contains the two others: element space, mind space, consciousness space. Your husband's soul is now in the sheath of a region of consciousness. Things can be found in consciousness space which do not exist here. As in passing from one place to another you are conscious of standing in between, so you will instantly arrive at the intermediate region of the mental world, lying between the physical and spiritual worlds. If, after forsaking all your mental desires, you abide in the spiritual world, you will certainly come to the knowledge of that spiritual being who comprehends all in himself. It is only by your knowledge of the non-existence of the world that you can come to know the positive existence of that being, as you will now be able to do by my grace, and by no other means whatever." Vasistha said. So saying, the goddess repaired to her heavenly seat, and Leela sat gladly in her mood of steadfast meditation. Within a moment she left the prison house of her body. Her soul broke out of its inner bound of the mind to fly freely into the air, like a bird freed from its cage. She ascended to the airy region of consciousness, and saw her husband sitting there amidst a group of princes and rulers of the earth. He, as King Vidurtha, was sitting on a throne hailed with a loud shout of, "Long live the king, and be he victorious!" His officers were prompt in the discharge of their different duties. The royal palace and hall were decorated with rows of flags, and there was an assembly of innumerable sages, saints, Brahmins, and rishis at the eastern entrance of the hall. At the southern porch stood a throng of princes and chiefs of men without number, and standing at the western doorway a bevy of young ladies. The northern gateway was blocked by lines of horses, carriages, and elephants. A guard advanced and informed the king of a war in the Deccan. He said that the Carnatic chief had attacked the eastern frontier, and that the chieftain of Surat had subjugated the barbarous tribes on the north, and that the ruler of Malwa had besieged the city of Tonkin on the west. Then there was the reception of the ambassador from Lanka, coming from the coast of the southern sea. Next appeared the spiritual masters, the Siddhas, coming from the Manhandra mountains bordering the eastern main, having traversed the many rivers of their river districts. Next appeared the ambassador of the Gayaka, or Yaksha tribes that inhabited the shores of the northern sea. Likewise there were envoys visiting from the shores of the western oceans and relating the state of affairs of that territory to the king. The assembly of innumerable chieftains from all quarters filled the entire courtyard with luster. The sounds of Brahmins chanting on sacrificial altars were drowned under the roar of tambourines, shouted announcements, and a loud praise of speakers, all re-echoed by the uproar of elephants. The vault of heaven resounded to the sounds of vocal and instrumental music, and the dust raised by the procession of elephants and chariots, and the trotting of horses' hoofs hid the face of the sky like a cloud. The fragrance of flowers, camphor, and heaps of frankincense perfumed the air, and the royal hall was filled with presents sent from different provinces. His fair fame shone forth like a burning hill of white camphor, raising a column of splendor reaching to the sky and casting sunlight into the shade. There were district rulers busily employed in their grave and momentous duties, and great architects who conducted the building of many cities. Then the ardent Leela entered the royal assembly hall of the ruler of men. She was unseen by any, just as one void mixes with another void, and as air is lost in the air. She wandered about without anyone there seeing her, just like a fair figure formed by false imagination of our fond desire is not to be perceived by anyone outside ourselves. In this manner she continued to walk about the palace unperceived by all, just like a castle in the air built in one's mind is not perceived by another. She saw them all assembled in the royal court in their former forms, and saw all the cities of the princes concentrated in that single city of our Lord. She viewed the same places, the same dealings, the same concourse of children, the same sorts of men and women, and the same ministers as before. She saw the same rulers of earth and the very same pundits as before, the identical courtiers and the same servants as ever. There was the same assembly of learned men and friends as before, and the like throng of citizens pursuing their former course of business. She suddenly saw the flames of wildfire spreading on all sides, even in broad midday light, and the sun and moon appearing both at once in the sky, and the clouds roaring with a tremendous noise, with the whistling of the wind. She saw trees, hills, rivers, and cities flourishing with population, and the many towns and villages and forests all about. She saw her royal consort as a boy of 10 years of age, after shaking off his former frame of old age, sitting amidst the hall with all his former retinues, and all the inhabitants of his village. Leela, having seen all these, began to reflect within herself whether the inhabitants of this place were living beings or the ghosts of their former individual souls. Then, having recovered her ordinary sense at the removal of her trance, she entered her inner apartment at midnight, and found the residents fast bound in sleep. She woke her sleeping companions one by one, and said she was anxious to visit the royal hall. She wanted to sit beside the throne of her lord, and to clear her doubt by seeing the courtiers all alive. The royal servants rose up at her call, and obedient to her command, they said, "Be it so," and attended to their respective duties. A group of staff-bearers ran to all sides to call the courtiers from the city, and sweepers came and swept the ground as clean as if the sun had shed his lights upon it. A better set of servants cleaned the courtyard, as clean as autumn days clear the sky of its rainy clouds. Rows of lights were placed before the courtyard, which looked as beautiful as clusters of stars in the clear sky. Throngs of people filled the courtyard, like the ancient earth had been covered with the flood of the great deluge. Dignified ministers and chiefs attended first and took their respective seats, appearing as if they were set a newly created ruler of the various people of the world, or the regents of the quarters of the sky. The cooling and fragrant odor of thickly pasted camphor filled the palace, and the sweet-scented breeze profusely breathed the fragrance of the lotus flowers, which they bore from all sides. The chamberlains stood all around in their white garbs, appearing like an assembly of silvery clouds hanging over the burning hills under the equator. The morning breeze had strewn heaps of flowers over the ground, bright as the beaming dawn, dispelling the gloom of night, and bleached as clusters of stars fallen upon the ground. The retinue of the chiefs of the land crowded the palace, which seemed like a lake full of full-blown lotuses, with fair swimming swans rambling about. There Leela took her seat on the golden seat by the side of the throne. She appeared as beautiful as Rati seated in the joyous heart of Kama. She saw all the princes seated in their order as before, and the elders of the people, and the nobles of men, and all her friends and relatives seated in their proper places. She was highly delighted to see them all in their former states. Her face shone brightly like the moon to find them all alive again. Book 3, Chapter 18. Leela wonders which world is real. Saraswati explains. Leela said, "I have much consolation in you, and now will I console my sorrowing heart." So saying, she made a sign for the assembly to break, and rose from her royal seat. She entered the inner apartment, and sat by the side of the dead body of her lord, hidden under the heap of flowers, and began to reflect within herself. She thought, "Oh, the wonderful magic that presents these people of my palace situated in the same manner outside of myself, as I saw them seated within me in my meditation. Oh, how great is the extent of this delusion that contains the same high hills, and the same spacious forests of palm and hintala trees situated both outside and within me. Like a mirror shows the reflection of hills within itself, as they are without it, so the reflector of the intellect presents the whole creation inwardly, as it has outside of itself. I must now invoke the goddess of wisdom to determine which of these is illusion and which the sober and certain reality." So thinking, she worshipped and invoked the goddess, and immediately saw Saraswati in the form of a virgin. She made the goddess sit on an elephant's seat, and having seated herself low upon the ground before her, asked the divine power to tell her the truth. Leela said, "Be gracious, O goddess, and clear this doubt of your supplicant, for it is your wisdom that first framed this beautiful system of the universe and knows the truth. Tell me, O great goddess, about what I am now going to relate to you, for it is by your favor alone that I may be successful to know of it. I saw the pattern of this world in the intellect, which is more transparent than the ethereal sphere, and so extensive that it contains millions and millions of miles in its small space. No definite words can express what is known as the calm, cool, and indescribable light. This is called unintelligible intelligence, and is without any cover or support. It exhibits the reflections of space in the course of time, and those of the sky in its light in the course of events concerning itself. Thus the images of the worlds are to be seen both within and outside the intellect, and it is hard to distinguish the real and unreal ones between them. The goddess asked, "Tell me, fair maiden, what is the nature of the real world, and what you mean by its unreality?" Leela replied, "I know the real is where I find myself sitting here, and looking upon you as seated in this place. What I mean by unreal is the state in which I saw my husband in the ethereal region some time ago, because emptiness has no limit of time or place in it." The goddess replied, "Real creation cannot produce an unreal figure. A similar cause cannot produce a dissimilar effect." Leela replied, "But, O goddess, we often see dissimilar effects produced from similar causes. The earth and an earthen pot are similar in substance, yet one melts in water and the other holds water." The goddess said, "Yes, when an act is done by an aid of auxiliary means, there the effect is found to be somewhat different from the primary cause. Thus the earthen pot being produced by the auxiliary appliances of fire, the potter's wheel and the like, differs in its quality from the original clay. Say, O beautiful maiden, what were the cause of your husband being born in this earth? The same led to his birth in the other world also. When the soul has fled from here, how can the material earth follow him, and what auxiliary causes can there be in connection with this cause? Whenever there is a contributing cause in addition to the apparent cause, everyone usually attributes the result to some unknown prior cause or motive." Leela said, "I think, O goddess, that the expansion of my husband's memory caused of his regeneration, because it is certain that memory is the cause of the reproduction of objects before us." The goddess replied that memory is an aerial substance, and its productions are as unsubstantial as itself. Leela said, "Yes, I find memory to be an airy thing, and its reproduction of my husband and all other things within me are only empty shadows in the mind." The goddess replied, "Therefore your husband and all those other things that appeared to your sight in your reverie truly were such reproductions, my daughter, and so is the appearance of all things I see in this world." Leela said, "Tell me, goddess, in order to remove my conception of the reality of the world, how the false appearance of my formless Lord was produced before me by the unreal world." The goddess replied, "As this illusionary world appeared a reality to you before you had memories of it, so you must know that all this is unreal from what I am going to relate to you." Saraswati speaking, "In some part of the sphere of consciousness there is the great fabric of the world, with the glassy vault of the firmament for its roof on all sides. Mount Meru, the polar axle or mountain, is its pillar, surrounded by the regions on the 10 sides, like statues carved upon it. The 14 regions are like so many apartments of it, and the hollow vault containing the 3 worlds is lighted by the lamp of the luminous sun. Its corners are inhabited by living creatures resembling ants. They are surrounded by mountains appearing as anthills in the sight of Brahma, the prime lord of creation and the primeval patriarch of many races of men. All animal beings are like worms confined in cocoons of their own making. The blue skies above and below are like the suit of this house, beset by bodies of departed spirits resembling groups of gnats buzzing in the air. The fleeting clouds are the smoke of the house, or like spider webs in its corners, and the hollow air is full of aerial spirits, like holes of bamboos filled with flies. They are also the playful spirits of gods and demigods, hovering over human houses like swarms of busy bees about vessels of honey. Here and there, amidst the cavity of heaven, earth, and the infernal regions, lay tracts of land well watered by rivers, lakes, and seas on all sides. In a corner of this land was a secluded piece of ground sheltered by hills and crags about it. In this secluded spot, sheltered by hills, rivers, and forest, there lived a holy Brahmin man with his wife and children, free from disease and care of gain and fear of a ruler. He passed his days in his fire worship and hospitality with the produce of his cattle and lands. Book 3, Chapter 19. Story of a former Vasistha and Arundhati. Vasistha relating the story of Lila, Saraswati speaking to Lila. In his age and attire, in his learning and wealth, and in all his actions and pursuit, this holy man was equal to his namesake, except in his profession, the one being a secular man and the other the priest of the royal family. His name was Vasistha. His wife was Arundhati, fair as the moon and like the star of the same name visible from earth. She resembled her namesake, the priestess of the solar race, in her virtues and parts in all things, except in her soul and body. She passed her time in true love and affection in the company of her husband, and she was his all in the world, with her sweet smiling face resembling a camuto flower. Once this holy man had been sitting under the shady sorala trees on the tableland of his native hill, when he saw the ruler of the land passing below with his gaudy train. He was accompanied by all the members of the royal family and his troops and soldiers. They were going to a hunt with a clamor that resounded in the hills and forests. The white flapper fans shed a stream of moonlight that lifted banners appeared like moving forests, and the white umbrellas made a canopy of the sky. The air was filled with dust raised by the horse hoofs, and the lines of elephants, with their high pavilion saddles, seemed like moving towers that protect them from the heat of the sun and the hot winds. The loud uproar of the party, resembling the roaring of a whirlpool, made wild animals run on all sides. Shining gems and jewels were flashing all about on the bodies of everyone in the party. The holy man saw this procession and thought to himself, "Oh, how charming is royalty, filled with such splendor and prosperity! Ah, how shall I become the monarch of all 10 sides, and have such a retinue of horses, elephants, and foot soldiers, with a similar train of flags, flappers, and blazing umbrellas? When will the breeze gently blow the fragrance of kunda flowers and the powdered dust of lotuses to my bedchamber to lull me and my consort to sleep? When shall I adorn the faces of my chambermaids with camphor and sandal paste, and enlighten the faces of the 4 quarters with my fair fame, like the moonbeams decorate the night?" With these thoughts the holy man determined that for the rest of his life he would apply himself vigilantly to the rigid austerities of his religion. At last he was overtaken by infirmities which shattered his body, like the sleets of snowfall batter the blooming lotuses in the lake. Seeing his approaching death, his faithful wife was fading away with fear, like a vine withers at the departure of spring for fear of that summer heat. Arundhati then began to worship me, as you yourself have, in order to obtain the boon of immortality, which is hard to be had. She prayed, "Ordain, O goddess, that the spirit of my lord may not depart from this tomb after his death." I granted her request. After some time Vasistha, the holy man, died, and his empty spirit remained in the emptiness of that home. By virtue of the excessive desire and merit of acts in his former state of existence, this aerial spirit of the holy man assumed the shape of a mighty man on earth. He became the victorious monarch of the 3 realms. By his might he subjugated the surface of the earth. By his valor he conquered the high mountains of the gods. By his kind protection the Netherlands were under his sway. He was like a raging fire to the forest of his enemies, and like the steadfast Mount Meru amidst the rushing winds of business on all sides. He was like the sun expanding the lotus-like hearts of the virtuous. To the eyes of woman he was like the god Kama. He was the model of all learning, and all-giving, wish-fulfilling tree to his suitors. He was the footstool of great scholars. He was like the full moon, shedding ambrosial beams of enlightened rule all around. But after the holy Brahmin had died, and his dead body had disappeared into the forms of elementary particles and air, and his airy spirit had rested in the aerial intellectual soul within the empty space of his house, his holy Brahmin widow, Arundhati, was pining away in her sorrow, and her heart was rent in twain like a dried pea-pod. She became a dead body like her husband. Her spirit, by shuffling off its mortal coil, resumed its subtle and immortal form, in which it met the departed ghost of her husband. She advanced to her lord as rapidly as a river runs to meet the sea below its level. She was as cheerful to join him as a cluster of flowers inhale the spring air. The houses, lands, and all the immovable properties and movable riches of this holy Brahmin Vasistha still exist in that rocky village, and it has been only 8 days since the souls of this loving pair were reunited in the hollow vault of their house. Book 3, Chapter 20. Saraswati explains Leela's former life as Arundhati. Saraswati said to Leela, "That Brahman who I described before, the one who became a monarch on earth, is the same as your husband. His wife Arundhati is no other than yourself, the best of women. You two are the same pair now reigning over this realm, resembling a pair of doves in your nuptial love, and the gods Shiva and Parvati in your might. I have related your past lives to you so that you may know the individual soul to be only air, and that knowledge of its reality is an error. False knowledge casts its reflection on consciousness and causes error also. Errors in the senses breed errors in the mind. This makes you doubtful of the truth and untruth of the two states, of the material and intellectual worlds. Therefore the question, which is true and which is untrue, has no better answer than that all creations are equally false and unsubstantial." Vasistha said, hearing these words of the goddess, Leela was confused in her mind, and with her eyes staring with wonder she addressed her softly. Leela said, "How is it, O goddess, that your words are so incoherent with truth? You make us the same as the Brahmin couple who are in their own house. We are sitting here in our palace. How is it possible that the small space of the room in which my husband's body is lying could contain those spacious lands and hills and the 10 sides of the sky? It is impossible as confining an elephant in a mustard seed, or a gnat fighting with a body of lions in a nutshell. It is as incredible as to believe a lotus seed contains a hill, or to be devoured by a little bee, or that peacocks are dancing hearing the roaring of clouds in a dream. O great goddess of gods, it is equally improbable to say that this earth, with all its mountains and other things, is contained within the small space of a sleeping room. Therefore, O goddess, please explain this mystery clearly to me, because it is by your favor only that the learned are cleared of their questions." The goddess Saraswati said, "Hear me, fair maiden. I did not tell you a lie. Transgression of the law is a thing unknown to us. The law is, nanritam vadita, never tell an untruth. It is I who establish the law when others are about to break it. If I should slight the law, who else is there who would observe it? The individual soul of the village Brahmin saw within himself and in his own house the image of this great kingdom, just as his departed spirit now sees the same in its empty void. Therefore, both these states are equally ideal. After death, you lost the memory of your former lives, just like one loses memories of waking events when in a dream state. All are like the appearance of the 3 worlds in dream, or their formation in the imagination, or like the description of warfare in an epic poem, or like water in a mirage on a sandy desert. The hills and houses seen in an empty space of the Brahman's house were nothing but the capacity of his own mind to form the images of its fancy and receive the external impressions, like a reflecting mirror. All these, though unreal, appear as real substance on account of the reality of consciousness, which is seated in the cavity of the innermost sheath of the body and reflects the images. But these images, derived from the memories of unreal objects of the world, are as unreal as those objects which cast their reflection upon consciousness. Waves rising in the river of a mirage are as unreal as the mirage itself. Know that this chair sitting in this room of your house, as well as myself and yourself and everything else about us, are only the reflections of our consciousness, without which nothing would be perceptible. Our dreams and fallacies, our desires and fancies, and also our notions and ideas serve as the best evidence to understand this truth, that nothing is true besides the subjective mind, which creates and forms, produces and presents all objects to our view. The spirit of the Brahman resides in the emptiness of this house, the body, with the seas, forests, and the earth within itself, like a bee lives in the lotus. Thus the habitable earth, with everything it contains, is situated in a small cell in one corner of the consciousness, like a spot of flimsy cloud in the sky. The house of the holy Brahman was situated in the same locality of consciousness, which contains all the worlds in one of its atomic particles. Every atom of the intelligent soul contains unnumbered worlds within worlds, enough to remove your doubt of the Brahman being able to see an entire kingdom within the space of his intellect. Leela asked, "How can we be the Brahman couple when they died only 8 days before, and we have been reigning here for so many years?" The goddess replied, "In reality, there is neither any limit of space or time, nor any distance of place or length of time. Hear me now tell you the reason why. As the universe is the reflection of the divine mind, so are infinity and eternity but representations of himself. Listen to what I tell you about how we form the idea of time and its subdivisions, whether a moment or an age. It is the same way that we make distinctions among the individuals that are me, you, and this or that person. As soon as one feels the lack of senses after his death, he forgets his former nature and thinks himself to be another being. Then in a twinkling of an eye he assumes an empty form in the womb of emptiness, and in that container he thinks within himself, "This is my body with its hands and feet." Thinking about body, he finds it presented before him. Then he thinks in himself, "I am the son of this father, and am so many years old. These are my dear friends, and this is my pleasant home. I was born and became a boy, and then grew up to this age. There are all my friends, and in the same course of their lives." Thus the compact destiny of the sphere of his soul presents him with many other images that appear to arise in it as some part of the world. But they neither rise nor remain in the soul itself, which is as transparent as empty air. They appear to consciousness like a vision seen in a dream. A person dreaming remains in one place, but sees all manner of things in different places. Everything in the other world appears equally real, just like in his dreams. Again, whatever is seen in the other world, the same occurs to men in their present states also. The unreality of the world of dreaming and the reality of this physical world are alike. Just like there is no difference between the waves of the same seawater, so the produced visible creation is the same as the unproduced intellectual world, both of which are equally indestructible. But in reality the appearance is nothing but a reflection of consciousness, which apart from the intelligible spirit is merely an empty void. Although presided over by the intelligible spirit, creation itself is a mere void, its only substance being the intelligible soul, like water is to waves. Waves, though formed of water, are themselves as unreal as the horns of hares. Their appearances as natural object is altogether false, because they are the effect of the auxiliary cause of the winds that have raised them. Therefore, there being no visible object in reality, how can the observer have any idea of materiality which loses its delusion at the moment of its death? After the visible outer world has disappeared from sight, the soul, in its inner world of the mind, reflects on its memories of creation according to the proper time and place of everything. It remembers its birth, its parent, its age, and its residence, with its learning and all other pursuits in their exact manner and order. It thinks of its friends and servants, and of the success and failure of its attempts. The uncreated and incorporeal soul, in its intellectual form, reflects on the events of its created and corporeal state. However, it does not remain in this state for long. Soon after death it enters a new body to which the properties of the mind and senses are added afterwards in their proper time. It then becomes a baby, finds a new father and mother, and begins to grow. Thus, whether one may perceive it or not, it is all the product of his former memories. Then upon waking from this state of trance, like a fruit from the cell of a flower, it comes to find that a single moment appeared to it as a period of an age. It was in this way that in times past, King Harish Chandra thought one night to be 12 years. One day seems like a year to those who are separated from their beloved objects. Again, it is all false, whether the birth or death or someone in his dream, or being born and recognizing a father in infancy, or a hungry man imagining he is dining on dainty food. So who would believe a satisfied man after eating who says he is starving, or one who declares that he is an eyewitness of something he had not seen, or of an empty space full of people, or that someone found lost treasure in his dream? But this visible world rests in the invisible Spirit of God, like the property of pungency resides in the particles of the pepper seed, and like the painted picture on the column. But where are the open and clear-sighted eyes to perceive this? The vision of Leela, called Samadhi in Yoga, and clairvoyance of spiritualism, was the abstract meditation of her Lord in her memory that presented her with a full view of everything imprinted upon it. Memory is taken for the whole consciousness, Chit, which is identified with God, in whose essence the images of all things are said to be eternally present.